Zurück mit
So I'm actually super, super excited, like, to have you on here. I am so excited. It was funny because I was trying to tell my mom, who, by the way, was like, as soon as my mom's Asian. And so you have to understand that Asians are really into astrology. They're really into numbers. They're really into a lot of stuff. So I told her, she lives next door. I'm like, I'm going to be recording an astrologer today, but she's like also a scientist. So I have like tons of questions. And she's like, what's her screen name? And does she have like a WhatsApp and a line? I'm like, Jesus, mom, chill out, mom. I said, I will give you her Instagram. You can follow her Instagram. She's got a podcast, but she's really cute. But I was telling her, I said, she's like, how did you meet her? And I said, well, we had a mutual friend suggest that we should be friends, and they were spot on. It must have recognized the nerdness or something, spot on.
Yes.
And I said, and what was funny was that she was so I told my mom, I said, she was so understanding because I'm so weird about numbers. And she requested to be a friend on my private page, but it had 666 and 666. And I didn't want to mess with that because if I added her, I had to kick somebody out and I didn't feel like going through it. So then I was going to go add hers, but she had 777 and I didn't want to mess with that. So I wrote her this log thing and my mom's like, you're really weird. And I'm like, yeah, but she was totally understanding. She
That
goes,
makes
she's
sense.
really weird too. And I'm like, yeah.
I guess so. I guess we're weird in a similar way, you know. I also grew up in the US with a mother who was from another continent, and I don't know if my mother wants me to talk about that, but too bad I'm talking about that.
Yeah. Can you say what continent?
Yes, Europe. My mother is from Belfast, Northern Ireland, so she's also Catholic, and that was the minority religious group there. So politically, I don't know what to say about that experience because it's not my own. It's so radically different from what I experienced
Yeah.
growing up in Chicago. But
Yeah.
I think it probably contributes in some ephemeral way to what we're talking about.
Yeah. Do you ever like have like talks about it with her, like what it was like? And I mean, it must be
A little
fascinating,
bit. Like she
actually.
told me when she was growing up, you know, she didn't go anywhere alone. They would always have somebody with them, like literally like a neighbor or a family member holding hands, like walking down the street. And there were certain places they could not go. And so being from Chicago, I suppose the closest comparison I had was like with certain like gang territories, you can't go past a certain point from this intersection of streets and stuff like that. But I think the stakes were a lot graver for her. And I think she was trying to protect me from that. So, like, she didn't elaborate a ton. But to be realistic, I grew up in a community where most people did not look like me. So, I kind of figured it out, and I imagine maybe you have similar experiences.
I find it like really I was like super excited and cool like when he suggested we be friends because I was like, oh, I don't have like goth girlfriends. And people would think that I had goth girlfriends, but I was like such an awkward person. I was always an introvert and all my friends were skater guys. And so like I didn't have goth and I was like and I always get jealous when I have like guy friends that are like, yeah, my goth girlfriends. And I was like, I want goth girlfriends. Like, I don't have any friends that are girls that are goths. I'm like, well, where's all my goth girlfriends?
Girls can
Because they're
be so
just
mean.
Right, I think I just never had, like I don't think I didn't really have a lot of girlfriends. I'm just weird. So it's
Same.
just
Like
I was just stayed at home.
I grew up having a lot of gay male friends, or just like male friends in general, or like, you know, growing up as a girl who was very interested in science or was very opinionated, in at least in my time, like it was not considered normal or like, I guess, acceptable with the gender role. I can't even count how many birthdays I spent at the Field Museum looking at the Egyptian mummy exhibit. Like that seemed
Yeah.
normal to me. So
Yeah.
it's interesting to see.
I totally get why he said we should be friends. I
I
love
think,
your
yeah, I
energy.
think so too. Even though I'm like on the mystical side and you're on the science side, like, yeah.
No, but see, that's why I really was interested in talking to you about it because I wanted to know you are on a scientific side, anthropology, and yet you have such great knowledge about astrology as well. And I think, and I was thinking about this earlier today before I was thinking about, talking to you, and I said, it's almost like astrology was treated like how the Salem witch trials and things were treated, in the sense that it took power, I think, away for people to say, it's nothing. It's just hocus pocus,
Mm,
BS kind of stuff. Because if you think in every culture, and I'm going to be talking to an archaeologist tomorrow, but if you look at a lot of cultures, what are important figures in cultures? Shaman, um, star readers and stuff. So those people had influence and those people had power. So it would
mhm.
make sense to me if over time that they were like, "Oh, those are just like, charlatans. Those are just, nothing." And taking that power away so that people are like, "Ah, it's just phony baloney stuff." And that's sometimes what people really believe. And I remember as a child, when we were younger, we're looking at astrology in the newspaper and a teacher came, "What are you looking at?" And he's like, "Oh," and I remember, "Self-fulfilling prophecy," he said. And so for years I grew up thinking, "Oh, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy." So I didn't think too much of it
Mhm.
until I 20 years ago met mutual friend, and he asked about it and I said, I don't know much about it other than this is my star sign. I don't look into it." But in the course of 20 years, because he got me interested in it, and being a person that likes science because I like facts, I like something that can be proven, I sit there and we know that different planets emit different energies. I mean, it's just that they emit different energies. So wouldn't it make sense if you were born in a certain place at a certain time that you had different energies of different planets, like a cosmic recipe soup of like these are the ingredients over you at the
I love
time?
that.
It makes sense to me. So I feel like I'm more leaning as I've gotten older on the side of this makes total perfect sense sometimes.
I love that perspective. And yes, I was a cultural anthropology major in school. And so, like, as a social science person, research and ethnographic perspectives were part of the schema. And we have to suspend our beliefs doing that. And I think that's really integral to like doing what I do, because strangely, you would think maybe it's all about faith and belief, but really, I think to serve people through utilizing these tools of divination, a person has to put their ego on hold and put their socially kind of informed ideas as much on the back burner as we can, and just try to observe and figure out what the data is saying, right? Like, because
Yeah.
astrology is kind of weirdly the greatest human data project available to us. The ancients in the Hellenistic era made a lot of observations, and modern people can try to discount it. I suppose it may be a hot take to say maybe there's a greater reason why it's denied so heartily, so
Hmm.
emphatically. Like maybe, you know, My understanding is people who have had positions of power historically have utilized these tools, whether or not they place faith in it. So,
Hmm.
um, my personal idea is that Carl Jung's idea of synchronicity seems to resonate a lot, and whether or not we even think about connections, they exist. I've observed that many times over in the 2 decades plus that I've been practicing this. And the irony, of course, is that I started doing this trying to disprove it.
Wow. That
Yeah.
and that's really cool. That's really cool though. That
Yeah.
in trying to do one thing that you've discovered something else. And I've done things that way too, but not something like that. And that's actually really, really cool. And being able to, sit there and say, well, okay, maybe I was wrong. Maybe there's more to this. And I think that that's kind of amazing because a lot of people sometimes get so stuck in a belief and it's like, no matter what data you give them, it's just like, you know, they won't listen to it because they're just, this is exactly what I believe. How old were you when you first started looking into it more?
I was about 11 or 12 years old.
Yeah.
So,
That was the age that we had the self-fulfilling prophecy.
right. Like, I feel like 11, 12, 13 is when most kids start, like, kind of self actualizing on some level of, like, getting into books or music or something that expresses a greater sense of self that's not just an echo of what mom and dad say.
Yeah. It's interesting because, obviously with a lot of friendships, it comes up. Like when you get close friends, they sit there and they're like, "Hey, what's your take on astrology?" Always. And it's weird because it's not I think a lot of people are curious about it, but almost feel like silly for asking. Like, hey, and it's just amongst friends, but I could see the hesitation where they're almost afraid to ask because they might seem like foolish for asking. And it's like, oh, I don't think that's a foolish question at all. And I'm like, my observations, and I, like I told you when you asked, I'm like, I don't know much more about it. And I just recently, and I told you this as well, I'm like, I just recently, because somebody asked me and I had no idea, I put it into AI and you, in comparison, did my chart just to see how it worked. And AI was off. So AI was like off. So people that are having AI do your charts, just be aware that it could be completely off and not accurate. But it's obviously something that interests people. I don't know why so many people think it's taboo, but a lot of people are interested in it. I said my observations as a person that never looked into it, but I noticed when I remember one day, like, because I save birthdays of my friends on my phone, and I would see clusters of like in this month, like of my closest friends. And my bestest friends, like the inner circle, were all clustered all right here. And I was like, and then I had like a group of, I would say, mid casual friends who were all clustered right here. And I'm like, I mean, it
Hmm.
could totally be a coincidence, right? But maybe that's something too, And I'm like, that's very, very interesting to me. I'm a Cancer, but my bestest friends are always Aries, and they
Mm.
have a completely different take on everything, like how they would react, how they would respond, but I as a person like that the other side. Like I want to hear the other side. So I've found it interesting that the closest people that I want have a completely different opinion on everything. But I love it. I love it because it gives me a different perspective.
Doesn't that kind of make sense though? I think people who represent like a kind of almost diametrically opposite perspective are the people that we benefit the most from. The framework of astrology kind of reinforces that idea, but if I may, looking at your chart, you have a Pisces sun in the fifth house, and that's someone who is intrinsically very connected to the social framework around them. Mars is in the sixth house, so you have a lot of interest in kind of what the I'm sorry, you have a Cancerian sun in the fifth house, so creativity and sort of intuition about what on a gut level feels real to people is important to you. The Mars in the sixth house sort of speaks to the idea of like what people do expresses who they are as kind of sort of directly implicit. Having an Aries second house implies that your values are sincerity, authenticity, and that Aries placement people are going to represent that sort of sincerity to you. So, without sort of knowing a lot about a person, I think typically looking at the second house of their chart is going to explain what they find valuable, whether or not they talk about it directly. And personal expression is usually very, very significant to people with an Aries second house. Would you say that resonates?
I would say, yeah, probably. I mean, I definitely am very much into authenticity. Like, I love, like, just it was so funny when people, I get people to come on the podcast and everyone's like, "Should we plan stuff to talk about?" I'm like, "No," because like if we picked up the phone, we wouldn't like have a this is what we plan to talk about. We would just talk, and I love conversations and just where conversations go because I think that um people are just fascinating. I love hearing people's journeys. I think that's one of the most fascinating things in life is just to hear. And I think as you get older, you appreciate people's journeys. Like, even if it's like so, oh my God, I just have to say, Diana, I'm loving your eye makeup so much. Like, every time you blink, I'm like, I love those. I, it's like my one thing that I do. Like, I do the eye makeup thing. And it's funny because I think it started when I was like young, and I'm still friends with all my friends from elementary school, and they'll tell you it's never changed. It's like the eyes, and people are like, why? And I'm like, it's I'm an introvert, and it's like panda eyes. And so my all my family calls me Panda. That's my nickname in the house, Panda or Raccoon. My mom calls me a raccoon. But it and maybe you will find as a goth girl, if this is a true statement or not. Did you find that sometimes dressing this way or doing your makeup this way kind of keeps people at bay sometimes because they're
Hmm.
just a little slightly intimidated?
I attribute that more to the death glare than anything. Growing up in Chicago, riding public transit from a young age,
Oh,
when
yeah.
you're a skinny white girl, you're not physically intimidating. I'm tall, but you know, I'm
Yeah.
scrawny. So the
Yeah.
only thing that could ever make me intimidating is looking maybe like I might stab a person. And that's all about
Yes.
your vibe. So I guess the astrologer in me wants to point out, though, that I have the planet Saturn on the ascendant, and Saturn is all about darkness. So a person can certainly leverage that to their advantage if they need to.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, yeah, it's kind of ironic because I'm like a pretty empathetic, gentle person, but my exterior persona is not that, and I think that's very much a survival thing that I developed, um, just to kind of like keep people at bay. So you're certainly picking up on something there.
Yeah. I mean, it's for me, I always found it awkward also to communicate with people. So I always found from an early age that having the panda eyes and the red lipstick and the black hair and you know, got it. Yeah. People like guys were afraid, you know, they would think, "Oh, she's probably crazy. She could probably stab you. She probably wears blood around her neck at night." That kind of stuff. But they stayed away. And like I would tell people, later on in life, they're like, "Did you get asked out a lot?" I'm like, "Never." Like never got asked out. I'm like, nobody ever approached me, and that was totally fine with me. Didn't get asked to prom, nothing. I'm like, but that was totally fine with me because I couldn't deal with that. It was like super, super awkward. But yeah, the death stare, totally. I mean, I think we all have that. The goth girls that just don't mess with us. So yeah, I was just appreciating it because I love it. It's the one thing I like to do.
Yeah, thank you. I love the way your sort of eggplant purple tone eye makeup contrasts with the blue. So
My cousin told me, he came by the other day and told me I look like a parrot.
what?
He's like, "You look like a parrot." He walked in the house, he's like, "You look like a parrot." I'm like, "That's cool.
I
I
would
like
never
it."
make that comparison myself, but love that.
I think it's just because I don't do anything else. Like, I don't, like, wear lipstick, I don't, like, do my nails, I don't do my hair. Like, I was telling you no, I was tell it was funny, I was telling Jenny V, from Eagles of Death Metal, I'm like, I admitted to her, I'm like, "I used to Flowbee for my hair." And that used to be so, like, embarrassing to tell people, and then I recently saw, like, George Clooney had did some interview, and he's like, "I used a Flowbee for years." I'm like, "See? Flowbee totally works." Just like, I'm justified now. Um,
I think nothing should be embarrassing. Like, I think we should all just unapologetically do and say whatever feels authentic. And we
yeah,
live in such a culture right now in this liminal space between hyper artifice that nobody really likes. Not sure if they ever liked it before, but they certainly don't love it now. And like, I think personally, like, even the astrology supports the idea of sort of personal authenticity being the guidepost leading us ahead. So I'm just kind of like, whatever the kids call cringe, I'm cool to do. Right. So, like, if
yeah,
being goth on some level is not cool, I really don't care. It wasn't cool when I was growing up. It's not cool now because I was kind of like in between those generations. I listened to like 1920s jazz music in high school and stuff. So
yeah.
I think following what we all feel is sort of resonant to us as people is more significant than anything else, ultimately.
It's interesting. I was a teaching librarian for several years, and when I first started, um, the kids came and it was, like, from 2 to 11, the kids, and when I first started, the kids would just, like, kinda stare, and this is at an international school, so we've got kids from and they just stare at my eyes, and some kids were honest, they're like, "Miss Lisa, your eyes are a little scary." They're like, "Why do you do it?" And I would tell them, I'm like, "'Cause it's like a panda, when a panda has his eyes like that, but then over time, they were just, like, so cool and accepting, and I remember the first kid that came up to me and said, "Are you a goth?" Because my dad says, "You're a goth." And I was, like, cracking up, and his dad was, like, working, and he's like, "'Cause, yeah, dad's talking, and he thinks you're a goth." I'm like, "I don't really label myself anything, but I would say, yeah, sure." But it's really cute when the ki and now I see some of those kids that now they're older and they're in high school, black eyeliner, black hair. I'm like I just sent a message to one of my friends, and she's like, "Daughter's into black eyeliner, heavy eyeliner, black lipstick." I was like, "Yes." I'm like, "Tell her Auntie Lisa's proud." You know? Um, I think that it's do you think that it's much easier today to be much more expressive than when you were younger, when I was younger?
Yes. Yes, because I was always someone who, like, for example, my parents were nearly 40 years older than me, right? So a lot of my classmates in the city of Chicago, their parents were maybe 20 years older than them. So the generation gap difference was there. And I grew up around media that was older than that because my father was really into stuff from earlier eras, like watching 1930s Fleischer Betty Boop cartoons was normal for me as a kid
Yeah,
in the 1990s. So it was hard to go to school and relate to other kids with that. Nowadays that wouldn't seem so weird. No one would bully you for that because of YouTube. Anyone
yeah,
can look at old cartoons or films or music videos or whatnot. Whereas, back then in the pre sort of internet saturation days, it was considered strange to not be in step with everything of the era. And I still was paying attention, but
yeah,
I guess because my references were so varied, I felt very pushed out, if that makes
yeah.
sense.
You said that, you listened to a lot of that kind of stuff growing up. Do you remember what were the first, like, bands or music that you were you would listen to and be like, "Oh, this really, really speaks to me." which was like
Mhm.
different from the stuff that you'd heard growing up.
Growing up, probably Cab Calloway was my first sort of artist. I remember thinking, wow, I love the spirit to his voice and the expressiveness there. As I got older, of course, exploring sociological stuff, maybe it made it more complex, but just on a base level, love Cab Calloway. Great stuff. All those Fleischer cartoons, all the Betty Boop cartoons with him are more embedded in our culture than we think. For example, all the goths who love The Nightmare Before Christmas, think about Oogie Boogie and his entire musical trajectory, and that riffs directly off of Cab Calloway in those cartoons. I think some of the first music, like I grew up around a lot of different musical influences, my parents being, both very interested in music. I think the first band I was really interested in that wasn't because of my parents actually was the Smashing Pumpkins. And my memory is that I was falling asleep in our minivan and I was hearing Cherub Rock. I was a very young child at that point. But I remember that riff. It's a very powerful riff. If you've
Yeah.
heard it, you know it, and you're not going
Yeah.
to forget it.
Yeah.
And that was burned into my brain instantly. And it didn't stop, after falling asleep or whatever. Like, I thought of it all the time. And that was really the first band where I kind of urged my parents to, like, go out to the store and buy the CD or whatever.
Yeah.
So, seems like a very, like, boring Chicagoan answer, but it's honest truth.
No, it's I've heard so many people, say that that was like I spoke to BJ Russell does Smashing
Mhm.
Pumpkins gear, and I talked to him and he said for him, he's like, I don't have any other answer than the first time I heard the Pumpkins, that was it. And
Mhm.
that's what he said. He was like, that was just it. And um I thought that that's really cool because it's those first bands. I started thinking about it, when coming out of COVID, like me and my son, we listened to a lot of music, and I'd realized that I'd stopped listening to music before COVID just because
Mhm.
life got involved. I was working, I was doing this and that, and then suddenly you're at home, you got nothing to do, so it's like, let's listen to music, and we'd start talking about music together, and I just found it really interesting how kids find music today is like so different from how you or I might have found music because we didn't have like you could digitally send it. It's like if you heard something, a lot of times you had to like wait and tape it off the
Mhm.
radio and then you can make a mixtape that way and hope that the DJs aren't talking on and then pass it to a friend. But it's so easy. And so like I started to wonder, does music sink in? Do they absorb it as much? You know,
Mhm.
because it seems so fleeting and fast. Like this is popular this week, and next week there's already something else. Whereas a long time ago, it seemed like you absorbed it because radios played it over and over, and we don't have a lot of radio stations that continuously play something anymore. So it's like it's changed, and so like I just wanted to have those kind of conversations, and then it just evolved into talking about other things and because I'm just nerdy and I want to talk about other things too, like anthropology.
Yeah, no, I think it's very much it overlaps astrologically, right? So a lot of people don't realize that planets like Neptune move very slowly, right? They're further away from our sun. So when someone tells me what sign their Neptune is in, I at least have a range of years they're born within.
Hmm.
For example, I would be considered in the millennial generation, and that's because Pluto was in the sign of Scorpio when I was born, and that was basically the era of alternative rock. And if you think about, I guess I'll just try to give the most shorthand answer of Pluto representing transformation and reckoning with the dark and the shadow aspects of things, both in self and society from the Jungian perspective. Scorpio being its natural home, Scorpio being the sign that aligns with Halloween and the season of death and decay, and sort of witnessing all the dark, shadowy stuff that we normally push aside. it makes a lot of sense why the music of the time had to do with confronting the stuff that people didn't want to talk about before, childhood trauma or gender based discrimination with like Lilith Fair type stuff, or just the pain that a lot of Gen X people experienced. And, coming from sort of the perspective of like California Dreaming, which is a great song, but you know what I mean? Like the sort of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
idealization of the Pluto and Leo hippie generation, which most of our parents come from. It was a reckoning and a confrontation of maybe brutal reality. So, um, growing up seeing that as an example certainly informed how I looked at the world.
Listening to you had this episode, the first episode I listened to of your podcast, and you were analyzing the Smashing Pumpkins and the different albums according to what were the different charts of the different people. And I'd never considered that up until then. And it was such an interesting episode because it makes absolute sense. Like, never thought about, because if you have different energies putting together different works, obviously it's going, like like we talked about before, it's almost like putting in different ingredients and this is what you get. And so
Yes.
I found that really fascinating, and I never considered it until watching your episode of like, huh, I wonder what was going on with this particular album or this artist and that album, and then starting to go like, well, that's actually really interesting, and I never thought of that take before. And now like totally obsessed with like, I wonder what was going on when this album was made, because maybe like a certain energy resonates. What I find interesting is your favorite Pumpkins album, I believe, is the same as mine. It's Machina.
Hmm.
Is it your favorite album? So,
Oh yeah.
and I find it really interesting because both of us are friends with Korg, and both of us know that at that time of the recording, according to him, it was like really awful times, just like all the energy and stuff. And it's like, that's so interesting to me that at such an awful time that
Hmm.
he would create something that so resonated with me. And it's like, how, and yet that's, that's somebody that you care about. And you're like, oh, that really sucks that they were going through a terrible time. But I often wonder, like, well, why does that though? How
Hmm.
was he able to transfer that into something that, and I've talked to a lot of people that said, well, the machine is great. So maybe you have an answer to this.
Well, I don't feel like my perspective is going to be even like, let me just say, majoring in cultural anthropology taught me the value of suspending culturally informed ideas and subjective personal ideas, which makes observation of everything in society different and in a valuable way. However, I don't know it's possible for me to look at music in the same way, right? Like Machina resonated for me on a very personal level. There are certain life experiences that I share with him. For example, early loss of a mother figure or a particular relationship to a father figure, et cetera, et cetera. It goes deep, but funny enough, as an astrologer, I look at kind of just the raw data too, and I'm like, wow, Machina, like the moon in that particular album's chart of release is almost exactly where my moon is in my natal chart. And the moon represents our feelings and our formative years and our gut instincts and things like this. So the id in Freudian terms. So it's kind of fascinating to think of it in that way. And
Yeah.
I've sort of had the advantage of working with a lot of people who love music as clients and comparing their charts to those of artists and albums they love. And there is always some salient connection. Like with Machina in particular, I think the moon in that chart is about 7 or 8 degrees of Capricorn, which would be a perfect sextile aspect with your moon in Pisces. And sextiles are harmonious, right? So there's like an emotional sort of ease of understanding there implied. And I think what kind of underscores the efficacy of this framework is that a person can say they don't believe in this, they don't care about it, and it's still going to work. You don't have to think about it. You can go back and look at the data and it will speak for itself.
I have a question from my producer who's not here because he's doing Pilates, but he had questions.
I love
Um,
questions.
he wanted to know, do you think there's any crossover, he said, with simulation theory and any findings on astrology?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, she'll understand. I'm like, you haven't even talked to her.
It's
How
a
do you know
very
she'll
broad
understand?
question.
Yeah, it's a very broad question. His other question was, has AI, oh, well, this actually is a good one. Has AI uncovered maybe any types of patterns that weren't maybe seen before by astrologers because they're able to crunch data, like so
Hmm.
much data, so much quicker? Has
Hmm.
there been any other like patterns in, just different, I don't know, standards of reading charts?
Well, here's what I think, right? AI already surpasses human capabilities in terms of being able to crunch numbers and kind of process all of that. But that data alone doesn't really do a whole lot. We have to be able to create meaning and make conclusions based upon that data and apply it to our lives for it to really be meaningful. Astrology is the longest standing data science project that we know of presently, and people have kind of routinely ignored it. Although I want to add that many people who have held positions of power from Julius Caesar onward, for example, utilized astrology as a tool. So for people who fancy themselves savvy and critical thinkers, I think they should consider the idea that maybe they've been given the idea of astrology as, you know, fanciful and not rooted in reality because perhaps it's a tool that someone
Yeah,
out there doesn't want them to utilize.
right. But just kind of agreeing with you, one of the things I teach the kids, is like, why was the Library of Alexandria burned down? You know, and I
Yes.
ask, kids that are 2 to 11, why do you think? And we'll talk about a lot of different things, and they're smart. They're like, because of the knowledge. I said, exactly, because of the knowledge. Because if you dumb down everybody, are they easier to control? And they're like,
Right.
yeah. I'm like, and that's why I said, why do you think that there are, groups like the Taliban that don't want, because I tell the kids, I'm like, do you know that some girls are not allowed to have education? And they're shocked because they're little kids. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, they are not allowed to have education. They're like, why? I'm like, because knowledge is power. And I said, and so that's why I was thinking earlier today, I'm like, it seems to me that just as it was so easy to claim, oh, that woman's a witch, let's burn her. Astrologers are witches, let's burn them. But it's power, right? Because they do have a lot of influence. You're absolutely right. Like the king of Thailand has an astrologer,
Mhm.
a lot of Asian countries have astrologers. Um, a lot of
Western
Asian
countries
countries,
too.
yeah, Western countries too have astrologers. It's, in I don't, it's something that like Sagan said. Somebody asked Carl Sagan, did he believe in God? And he said, I don't have enough evidence to prove that he exists, but I don't have enough evidence to prove he doesn't exist. So he's very open-minded, and I think that people should look at astrology kind of in that way, and I think that they would be kind of pleasantly surprised. Because I found that the more open-minded I am, I'm like, I find that there seems to be something to this. I do have a question. Pluto being removed as a planet by the Astronomical Society, how does that affect astrology?
Sure.
Does it affect astrology at all?
Yes. A bit, I suppose. But my first response is to say to anyone who is a critic of astrology, you don't have to decide in terms of like what's a belief or not. To me, it's about observation. I started my journey being a critic and wanting to disprove astrology. I obviously turned out on a completely different trajectory based solely on observation and processing what I was seeing and feeling and experiencing. And I think that's valid for every person. Um, what I will say too is that astrology doesn't have to follow a particular framework. There are many schools of thought, and I think they're all more dependent upon the reader rather than the school of thought. And go on your own journey. Like, the best value you can get out of these perspectives is to follow your own muse and explore and not just take for granted what is told to you all the time. You're going to notice, for example, a thought experiment. Choose a planet, probably better if it's further away from the sun: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. We'll get to Pluto in a second. But just choose one of those and start charting. Like, pick that planet in a sign. For example, Uranus in Gemini is about to happen. If we go back and look at the last time Uranus was in Gemini, that was in the 1940s. And a lot of the framework for what we see now technologically happened during those years. So don't trust what I or anyone else says. You can go back and use data and your own tools of observation to kind of extrapolate meaning and interpretation. And I think the subjective ability of each human is valuable. And astrology has taught me that too. There's kind of this middle ground between objective, observable data and fact and what we as human beings figure out. And
Yeah.
the tinfoil hat wearing part of me is going to say, perhaps there are people out there who have positions of power that do not wish for us regular people, so to speak, to figure all that out, right? If astrology was
Mhm.
nothing, if synchronicity didn't exist, why would people in positions of power for centuries utilize these tools? I'm not sure that they would all have the same superstition for hundreds and hundreds of years. There must be something
Yeah.
else to it. And I'm not trying to, again, I'm not trying to convince anybody. If they're
Yeah.
not interested, it's fine. But
Yeah.
I think raising questions is more important than trying to inundate people with answers. Is
Yeah.
that's a
I mean,
long-winded response? I'm sorry.
but it just like I said, it seems to make so much sense. Like if we study, like I was, my son asked me about it. He's
Mm,
14, and he's like, "What are your thoughts?" And I told him, I said, "Remember that one experiment I told you that they were playing a frequency, and if it was the wrong frequency of the balls didn't vibrate. But if it was the right frequency, then the balls vibrated." So I said, "So that scientifically proves that certain frequencies can resonate with one another." And I said, "And that seems to be with I found in, my knowledge, because this is what I tell kids. I try to tell the kids the best answer that I can have, which is this has been my experience." And so I say, "I feel energy with people." I said, "I can't explain it, but I definitely, like you and me, like we just got on right away. Um,
mhm.
Somebody suggested we would get on right away, and they were right. We just got on right away. But you've met people before, I'm sure, that you're just like, yeah, this, I don't want this energy. It's like, stay away. And you just kind of, and I believe in that. Like, I don't know if everybody like goes by energy. Like, if it's like I've been told I'm an empath, so I don't know
Mm,
if it's because of that. Um, but I stay away from, like, any kind of bad energy. I'm just like, "Yeah, that's not for me." Like, no bad feelings, but just not for me. So, wonder if there's something to that. Another thing, I was going to go meet my producer one day, and as I was waiting for him, I was just standing in a store. This man came up to me and said, "Hi, how are you?" He's like, "Can I talk to you for a minute? Can I have your hand?" And he was just like this little man. He looked like he was from India. And I said, "Sure." And he took my hand and he goes, "I wanted to talk to you because I saw your aura and your energy, and it was like very, very bright." And I thought, and I believe in stuff like this, but even the cynic in my head was like, oh god, he's gonna ask, he's gonna want money for a reading or something, right? That's it's gonna be some kind of a scam. And
Mhm.
so I saw my producer coming in. He was like, he saw me holding hands with some strange man. So he's kind of stood back, like, I don't know what's going on.
Right.
And then he just said, good things are going to happen to you in 3 months. And I'm like, okay, here it comes, you know. And then he just left and walked away. And he asked for nothing.
Mhm.
And then he came over and he's like, who was that man? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, that's never happened to me before. And 3 months later, something very good happened. And it was kind of crazy. And so, like I said to Desmond, I'm like, do you think that it was just a coincidence or do you think that that was a thing? And he's like, has that ever happened to you before? I'm like, no. I'm like, it was just like the whole time I thought this, yeah, he's going to be asking for something like I could do a reading for $20, you know, but it was nothing like that. And then I told a lot of friends and they're like, okay, where is this man? So we could go bump into him
It sounded
like
like
he
one
was
of
thinking
those
about.
things that just happens in the moment. You can't replicate it on purpose. And also, I will say, as a Pisces rising person, you're going to attract those kinds of moments, if that makes sense. And you have a very tight conjunction of Jupiter in your ascendant, and Jupiter represents serendipitous happenings. And it's the Lord of Fortune, right? And the Wheel of Fortune turns. Fortune is not always what we would value judge as good, but it does attract perhaps swift shifts energetically. And Jupiter is the traditional ruler of Pisces, also. So having the traditional Hellenistic astrologer would say, "Wow, having a Jupiter domiciled in its natural sign and also joined to the ascendant, and a very significant angle in the chart is very prosperous. It allows a person to sort of weather the hardships in life and kind of embrace the positive turnings. And in my personal experience, Pisces ascendant people usually have a particular, the ascendant represents our physical presence. So a lot of the time, people can feel those things, right? If he was attuned to these things, maybe he could feel that. And if he could extrapolate, it sounds very abstract, but the zodiac is a fixed sequence of 12 signs, right? So if you're ascendant, the first house sign is Pisces, the second house sign is going to be Aries, the third house sign is going to be Taurus, the fourth house sign is going to be Gemini, and so on, because it's a fixed sequence. So person who has a handle on that sequence, in addition to where the planets are moving presently in transit, they're going to be able to figure out a lot of information with very little. Like sometimes I intuit things about people too, and they seem astounded by it. And I'm not saying that intuition or something that we can't define isn't part of it, because it absolutely is. But there is a framework to it, whether or not it's being explained and delineated clearly to that person. Um, but what I will say is, even if it is outlined in detail, that's not where the magic lies. The interpretation is always more important. It's kind of like I could give you the sheet music, but are you going to make it sound the way someone else does?
Yeah, that's true. I find it interesting what you said because I and I've talked about, and a lot of my friends know this. I call myself an unintentional manifester. And the reason is it's like I'm never intentionally manifesting everything, but these weird things happen and all the time to me, like, and I can't explain it. It's like people go, "Oh, you know a lot of like, people in music and stuff like that." How, as a person that never leaves the house? I'm like, I'll maybe just say, "Oh, I like this," or whatever, and we get in a conversation and we just end up being pals or something. And they're like, "But you get into weird, really strange friendships." I'm like, "Yeah, but it's not like a purposeful thing of like, oh, I'm gonna go and be this person's friend." And so like I sit there and we make a joke of it because I was like, man, if I knew how to manifest it, I would manifest better things, like better things. Like I don't know what I would manifest, but I would manifest better things, right? But I, there's it's like one of those things that you can't explain. So what you said there was like, huh, I wonder if that, you like you said, there's some kind of correlation with that that I never thought about before.
Well, I think that's kind of the fun thing about astrology sometimes is you can say, well, I don't know, I've never thought about it. Maybe it has no bearing on my life, but then you can say, well, there's a person I feel a connection to, and let's look at how our charts compare, and that's where it gets interesting, right? Just looking at your chart, I can see right away the nadir in your chart, which is a significant angle, is almost perfectly conjunct my sun, for example, and the sun represents the core nature of a person. That is not insignificant. Um, your moon in Pisces is very close to the Mercury of the person that we have as a mutual friend. I could go on and on. Your sun at 16 degrees of Cancer is very close to my conjunction of Mercury and Mars in Cancer. So, I could sit here and kind of expound on what all that symbolically means, but what I can say in the shortest like sort of format is these are improbable things. It's not probable that you'd run into someone on the street and just have all these different connections, right? Like, I don't think it's probable that you would have a sort of inkling of connection with someone out of nowhere, really, and have
Yeah.
it, this provides context in a sense. And I don't think it's
Yeah.
about belief. I think it's more about kind of like you experience it first and then later it
Hmm.
kind of contextualizes it.
Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I think also, because like I have a friend in Nuge, he runs the Legends of Music account on Instagram. And he's got like a million followers. He's a lovely person. But we just met and we just instant best friends. And I sat there and I was like thinking about a lot of my close friends. It was just like met, instant best friends. Some of my bestest, closest friends today met when we were 12, still, and I bring them on the podcast. I'm like, you're still my friend. You were my neighbor. Like, let's talk. Let's talk about us when we were kids. But,
Oh,
and it's so solid still. Like no time has passed. It was just like
yes.
from the moment that we were friends, um, that was it. And it's still so it makes me think that there's something more to that. It's like, why are we still so close
Mm,
as friends? All these years later, nothing's changed. And I believe it's that energy.
I think so too. I mean, honestly, like all the time when I think of the people that I have these connections with, like what you're describing, I may, believe it or not, I don't talk about astrology all the time. I don't apply it all the time. I just interact with people in the moment if I'm not doing a job related to astrology. But then later, I think about all the connections that feel meaningful beyond, I guess, the superficial, something standing the test of time. And if I have the ability to look at the charts, they always reflect that in retrospect. So, yeah, it's interesting.
It's just like, how did, we sometimes go, how do we become such good friends so fast? And so he
Yes.
said, did you ever look at astrology? And I'm like, okay, let's compare our little things. And there was like some things that like resonated, but I found it really, and he again is another Aries. And I was like,
Mm,
that's just really interesting. And again, I found in the pattern again was we usually have different ideas about stuff. And I think
mm.
that that's what makes us. And we like to collaborate on Instagram because we do two totally different
You
things.
know his
But we like to,
birthday, sorry,
um, God,
or close to it because you have a couple planetary placements in Libra, which is the diametric opposite of Aries, and sometimes the dynamic energy of the opposition in synastry, which is comparing two people's charts, is really powerful. Personally, like I'm a Gemini sun person with a lot of placements in Sagittarius. It's opposite sign. So the other two mutable signs of Pisces and Virgo, I have a lot of friends with those placements, right? The square aspect that that produces is considered tense, but when it comes to comparing charts, that tension is considered good because we foster interesting conversations and growth. So my hypothesis was maybe this person's Aries placements activate your Libra placements in a way that's really exciting for both parties.
Yeah, I mean, because we just start talking about me. It's like what I love about him and how I found his account was that he was an Indian kid from Dubai, living in Dubai, and he was like posting Smashing Pumpkins, Metallica stuff, and I was just so curious of like how on earth did you discover these bands? Call me ignorant, but I wouldn't imagine that this type of music could be played there. And he was like, oh, totally could be played there. And I was like, okay, well, I learned something because I didn't know. And just talking to him, um, and he's so excited and passionate. And how he started his page was as he was learning about music, he just whatever he learned about from reading books, he'd make a post about it. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And so we like to collaborate because sometimes I'm like, hey, have you heard this song? And he's like, no, I've never heard of it. I'm like, what do you mean you never heard of it? This song is so good. And so we'll just do something because it's just, we just have a love of music. We're always constantly like sending each other music as he's discovering stuff and I'm sending old stuff. But it's such a, like a beautiful thing just to be excited. We're both super excited about that. And I'm like, and that's why I thought, I find it interesting that we were able just to connect, having completely different backgrounds, living in different places, different age groups. How does that happen? And so that's super fascinating.
Well, of course, I'm going to overuse the phrase the astrologer in me is going to say in your chart, the fifth house, for those who are not obsessive about astrology, the fifth house represents, among other things, joy and sources of connection with other people. And that sign in your chart is Cancer. So you have a fifth house sun, which explains why we're having this conversation because you're motivated to really live your life according to what makes you feel the most excited. Almost a childlike sense of wonder about life, which I think is really beautiful. And I'm happy to share that. You also have the conjunction of the planets Mercury, which represents intellect and communication, and Saturn, which represents kind of the cycles of time in that same sign of Cancer in the fifth house. So there's a part of you that, to me, that shorthand says there's a historian in you inherently. There's a part of you that recognizes the cycles of time and finds joy in understanding more about that. And I think other people are going to be drawn to that in.
Such a fascinating, rabbit hole for people to go down. And I always encourage people, if you don't know much about it, just read up about it. You might find some really interesting things about it. Cause like you said, to live something and then just go back and apply that and look back at it that way is really interesting because it's like you can't like if you think about it too much ahead of time, then it's like that self-fulfilling prophecy. But if you look at it retrospectively, it's like, huh. And that's constantly every time I look back at things retrospectively and apply that layer of astrology, it makes me go, huh. And that's why over the course of time, I'm much more open to it. When people now ask me, "Hey, are you into astrology?" I'm much more like, "Hey, what do you got? Like, what have you learned? Tell me what you got. Do you have different information than me? Like, I want to know because I find it absolutely fascinating. Like, I'm not gonna. I don't think that I would want to like my mom likes to. That's why my mom's like, I want to be your friend. I'm like I think that she will look into what's coming up, and that's maybe the one thing that's different from me because I'm more rational in that sense, saying at any moment I could walk outside and get hit by a car, so I'm not going to think too much about the future because it's forever changing.
I get asked that question a lot. Like, people say, can you tell me when I'm likely to die? And that's when ethics come into question because, sure, like you can study patterns, right? Astrology is about observing patterns and sort of the shorthand of how planetary placements seem to overlay with human experiences. I think a lot of people don't realize astrology was not about understanding people's personalities originally. This framework came about because people were observing certain events in time more connected to the earth in terms of, say, cultivating crops. And that just kind of grew from there. It was more of a calendar to begin with, which is why, if you say, for example, your sun sign is Cancer, I'm like, oh, the summer solstice. That's when the sun is in Cancer. It illustrates a particular time, and there's a lot of symbolic value that anyone can think about. Anyway, it's difficult to kind of distill it all into something small, but what I will say, like living in the city of Chicago, for example, I have a lot of fun with people who say they don't care for astrology because I go, look over there. That lamppost has the zodiac on it. And they look at me and they go, no, it doesn't. And I go, no, seriously, go look at that. And it does. And I'm like, it's woven into, maybe that lamppost was created 100 plus years ago.
Yeah.
It's threaded throughout our culture. Um, and in my opinion, this might be a hot take. This is what people want on podcasts, are hot takes. Um, History is written by the victors, as they say, right? It's considered objective. But what I will say is what is less manicured over time is mythology and the language of symbolism. And people who love science fiction will understand what I'm driving at, right? Because science fiction has often had embedded in it social commentary or messages about human nature that maybe weren't socially accepted at their time, but they were able to get through the ether and sort of survive throughout generations because it was obscured. What I believe about mythology and symbolism as embedded in systems like astrology is that there's greater wisdom to be derived from that is perhaps discounted by modern people because one, we've been taught not to care about it, and two, we don't necessarily have the vocabulary to approach it. But it's all around us all the time. And I think sometimes perhaps a richer understanding of the human experience is right in front of our faces, and we're just not grasping that because we don't realize it's there.
I didn't know this about the lamppost, and that's really, really cool. Like, now I'm like, "Oh, now I wanna
Oh,
go
it's
see the
on
lamppost."
buildings, it's
Oh
everywhere.
my god. There's that clock, is it in Prague? The Astra there's, like, a building that's got the clock
Yes,
that's, like, really cool, and I remember I saw it for the first time, a picture of it, like, several years ago, and our friend was touring over there, and I'm like, you should go check this out. He's like, I already saw it. And I'm like, oh my
of
God, that's
course.
so cool. I'm like, that's like amazing. Like, I'd never seen it. I never saw anything like that up until that point. I'm like, and and it was through social media that I, first discovered it. Somebody had a reel on it. I think that's the cool thing about social media, that people can, and there's not like a lot of great things about social media, but I think it is cool though that people can share different, like, because if you don't like it, if you don't believe it, you could just swipe away. But I am seeing a lot more people talking about, okay, well, everybody be careful, this planet is aligned with this planet. And I wonder, like, especially right now,
Mhm.
what's happening in the world.
Mm.
Um, did did astrologists see this coming? This, because
Mm.
it's not just in the US. It's
No.
the whole world right now, to me, energy seems so off. It just seems like things are not in harmony right now. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
Energy's not
Well,
in harmony. Did you
I
guys see
think
this
I'm
coming?
I think I'm picking up on what you're getting at, and I will say, like, the numerologist in me wants to point out it is a number 9 year, right? And in numerology, it's all about single digits. So 9 is the end of a cycle. It's all about wrapping up old patterns clearing out what didn't work anymore and establishing the groundwork for something new to grow in the subsequent year. Number one being a year of new growth. So, as a number 9 year, I think a lot is going to be changing. Astrologically speaking, we have a lot of changes. Late last year, we had Pluto, the planet of transformation, changing signs for the first time since 2008 into Aquarius. And then this year, we've had already Neptune entering Aries, which will be there for about 13 or 14 years total. We have Saturn entering Aries. We have a lot of big planetary shifts this year. So I think a lot of people are feeling that. Whether or not they believe is kind of irrelevant. We're all feeling the tumult and the shift and the uncertainty there. Um,
Yeah.
Personally, what I can say is it's not about control, right? It's not about trying to predict everything that's going to come, but it does help to get a sense of like, okay, sure, change is inevitable. It's
Yeah,
part
it's
of,
just a cycle.
yes, and there are
I
cycles that,
think that's the thing.
yeah,
I think
cycles
that's
are
the thing
human.
that it should people should understand. It's like, okay, well, yeah, it's just a cycle. It's just cyclical and it'll pass.
Yes, this too shall pass.
I mean, and I think that that's if there's anything that I mean, if people don't believe in astrology, I mean, I think that's a good thing to okay, believe in that. At least it'll pass. You know, like it just. I don't think that energies stay stagnant, and so I think that that makes life kind of hopeful. Just knowing that energy doesn't stay stagnant. It's continually changing and reacting with everything. And I recently, I believe in the beginning of the year too, there was that a whole bunch of planets aligned um in a row. Did you feel any kind of a shift when that happened as well, or did were you able to see that in charts? That because a lot of it, here's two things about it. When they say the planets align, up until recently, a lot of us also didn't like, I mean, it's just because this is what we grow up thinking. Here's the sun, and planets are just going, and they're all on the same line, going in the same circle. And we know that there's planets tilted this way. We know that it's not all in the same line anymore. We know that now because people have done really great graphics on reels where we can visualize it. We can also visualize now, and I love to repost it every time I see it. Somebody made a graphic of all the different speeds at which planets rotate. And I'm like, that's really interesting as well. Cause we always, it's just not that I think that people immediately assume that. I don't think that we just think about it. I don't think that anyone thinks about it like, oh, does Saturn rotate at a different speed or a different angle than us? But to me, that seems to all kind of go into that whole energy thing because if something's moving fast, it's going to create a different energy than something moving slow. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's to me, it seems so connected to science just because I believe so much in energy. And I believe so much in energy because I felt it in connections with people. I see it proven in science that energy can make things move and vibrations can make things move. So to me, that just kind of says it seems to make sense to me.
I think energy does move in cycles, and it's not, I don't know, I guess, how do we kind of compare and contrast our lived experiences with data? Ideally, we can experience something and compare it with data. That's what astrology, I think, strives to do. It's not about impressing upon people an idea that they're not feeling. I always say to my clients, if you don't feel this, you're under no obligation to agree with me, believe what I'm saying. In fact, I want you to disagree with me. I want you to have a conversation with me. 9 times out of 10, they don't because I am speaking to what they're
Yeah.
experiencing just out of, I suppose, the magic of intuition married with my years of research. But nothing's ever perfect. And I don't feel that it makes me seem incompetent to admit any human imperfection. In fact, I think that's what makes any scientist good, is to say, and let me make the disclaimer, I'm not saying I'm a scientist, but anybody who is worth their salt in what they do understands fallibility and human limitation. In astrological parlance, the archetypes of the planets kind of encompass different facets of human experience. Saturn would be the planet that represents limitation. Saturn's also very maligned. And, you hear people bitch about their Saturn return. Oh, it was so bad. It's all about learning important lessons in life, rites of passage. Saturn cycles are every 7 years. So, like, our cells regenerate every 7 years. It's very connected to biology. And
Yeah.
that biology, I believe, is also very connected to sort of our cognition and how it develops over time. And personally, I think, just entertaining that possibility of maybe having more meaning than just a belief system might be helpful, because I think I was about 14 when I really got into this stuff and found my stride, and that would be two Saturn cycles in, right? So I think when a person turns about 12, also, that would be their first return of Jupiter, which is the planet of sort of belief and faith and serendipity. So there are certainly planetary signatures that can kind of overlay human experiences, whether we think about them that way or not. I'm probably on
Yeah.
another tangent. So,
No, not at all. I mean, it's just so fascinating to me. Also, like, even my son, like, kind of like looking at it from an outsider perspective, like, okay, I know when he was born and all this kind of stuff. And like,
mhm.
just saying, is he following those things? Not discussing it with him, just saying he's a Cancer sign as well. And I told you he was also born like Chinese astrology is also into the years. So we were both Cancer signs and we were both like tiger years.
That's so
And I
cool.
find that we're so, so, so very similar, like, like very mirror image similar. And some people go, oh, it's just because you raised him. And I'm like, yeah, but
Mm.
I don't think it's just that. I'm like, there's definitely, there's things that are genetic. Like I see him take after things of me, take after things of his dad, take after things of his grandpa. There's definitely genetic things, but there's also other things that I think it makes sense that, okay, well, that's where he was born. My dad was a Cancer, which is really
Oh,
funny. So the three of us
wow.
we are almost exactly alike. We all like to stay at home. We all stay at home all the time. And we're very much, we always say, and me and my son have a crowd dance to annoy my mom. Um, we just go around the living room like this side, and we just go sideways, and he goes this way and I go that way. And we just do it to annoy her. Um, it's our crab dance. But we
Love
feel that like we're hermit crabs. And if like energy is too much, people are too much, I
it.
retreat.
Mhm.
So I resonate and I'm like, okay, maybe it's self-fulfilling prophecy, whatever, but it resonates with me. When I feel uncomfortable or overwhelmed by life, I retreat, I go away to this day. And I have to tell my friends, I'm like, sometimes I don't respond to text messages like a week or two. And it's just, life is overwhelming. Like, and
Right.
I want to give you my full attention and I can't give the full attention. So I'm just, and I tell people, I'm like, don't think that I will get to you, but it's like, I don't want to get to you half-assed, you know?
I think
Um,
there's an honor there, right? Because you want to give all of your attention to a person at a time. And if you know you can't give it at a time, you'd rather just say, look, I'll wait until I'm there with you.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm very much the same way, and a lot of people don't always understand. Like, I love you. It has no bearing on that if I take my time to get back to you. In fact, if I don't give you a half-assed reply, that's a good sign. But it's really
yeah.
hard to convince people of that sometimes because of our social world being so constructed around the idea now of constant availability all the time.
Instantaneous. Yeah.
Instant gratification, yes. And Cancerians, I think, inherently resist that because you're more about quality and sincerity, and you'd rather wait to have that moment where you can do that and foster that and be real, than be like, ugh, I feel like shit, but I'm gonna have to pretend.
Yeah.
That's not
Yeah.
interesting. And now that I'm looking at your chart too, I'm like, oh, your Venus in Gemini is really close to my sun. So we have a really easy conversation because Venus rules connection, right? And the sun rules like self expression. So on some level, you and I connect just as people expressing ourselves. And the Gemini archetype, when combined with Cancerian archetype, is a little hard to understand because Geminis can talk to everybody, but Cancerians are very insular.
I always tell people I don't talk to people at all. But I said, but if you're my, I call people my bee people. You remember the blind melon video for No Rain,
Yes,
where the girl
the
like,
bumblebee.
yeah, the little bee girl, and she's like sad, and everybody's like mean to her until she finds her bee people. And so when I started this podcast, I was telling Desmond, I'm like, my bee people will find me, like bee
Oh,
people will find each other. And I'm like, and that's, and that's how I feel, that's how I can explain connection. I just call people my bee people.
I
I'm
love
like,
that.
it's just that those are my people. Those are my peeps. Um, like I said though, it's like I find it so fascinating what you do. Um and I love it so much that you have that whole background on anthropology too. And it's funny, I'm going to invite you back on another time too because I have my friend that's an archaeologist. She's coming on tomorrow and we
Oh,
suspect
lovely.
that our podcast is going to be like 8 hours cuz there's so many archaeology like I love archaeology, I love science, and I'm like I bet Diana would love that too. I'm like she
Oh, me
probably
too.
love to come
I
on.
wanted to be an Egyptologist growing up. I went to, growing up in Chicago, I went to the Field Museum for at least three birthdays between the ages of like 5 and 9 years old to see the mummy exhibit. Wearing an Ankh necklace still. Yeah, I'm super obsessed with the Egyptian
She
empire.
unwrapped a mummy. And that's why like she unwrapped a mummy. She went to Peru to unwrap a mummy and I'm like, "Oh, I need to talk to you." And I'm like, "It's going to be an 8-hour podcast because
Yes.
I've got."
Oh,
She's
I
like,
mean,
"Is there stuff you want to talk about?" I'm
so
like,
cool.
everything. Like everything. Like everything I want to talk about. Like where can we start? I'm like Terracotta Army, Nazca Lions. I'm like everything.
Oh, I'm
I'm
so
like
with you on
Easter
that stuff.
Island. So, like, if you want to join tomorrow, same time tomorrow, I'm going to be recording Sarah. I've known her for years, but it's just like,
Yeah.
like I was telling her this morning, I'm like, I'm so excited.
Do I count as a female? I feel like an extraterrestrial entity most of the time. So if I count
No,
as a
it's,
human,
it's,
that's
my
cool.
mom was like, you only have guys on there. I'm like, I just have like a lot of guy friends because I was like such a tomboy, like I don't have like a lot of
Same,
girlfriends, like just
same.
such a
That's something we have in
nerdy
common.
tomboys. Yeah.
Yeah,
See, nerdy
I was always
tomboys.
very feminine. As I describe it, it's not hyperbole, it's truth. I was a girl that would want to climb a tree but still wear a dress.
Yeah.
Like I feel like
Yeah.
maybe you're the same way. And so, like, I also find that in our cultural backdrop, feminine people who are opinionated, interested in science, are very sort of direct about that stuff. It's not historically viewed very well. We get kind of
Yeah.
shunned a little bit. And is
Yeah.
neurodivergence part of it? Perhaps. I don't know. Personally, that's a whole other rabbit hole that I don't know how to unravel, between like trauma, history, and neurodivergence. I mean, I've researched a lot and I have thoughts, but do
Right.
I have conclusive data I would want to share with the world?
Oh,
No.
that's actually, yeah. That's
It's a lot.
interesting topic to go down. Yeah. Generational trauma and neurodivergency and, that's actually really
Generational trauma
interesting.
is such a big part of my practice. Like, people think they're just coming for like a fun birth chart reading, and a lot of the time it ends up being a very deep emotional experience. And I don't think that's because I'm willing it that way. I think it's just an organic sort of thing. And that's kind of why, like, there's a variety of
I think you're
bands.
giving them perspective.
Yeah, there's a variety of bands you could listen to, a variety of restaurants you could eat at. you can choose different practitioners and they're going to give you a different flavor. I just so happen to be someone that tends to bring out these deep patterns, and rather than shy away from it, I'm like very interested in that. So I think in some very vague thematic way that relates to delving into humanity's past. I don't feel like we have time to go too much into that, but I'm
We'll
very
go in it
fascinated by
anytime
it.
you ever want. I'll totally go down that rabbit hole with you anytime because
I
that's
mean,
it's super fascinating.
I was a cultural anthropology major, but I also took, so for those who don't know, anthropology has four major branches. There's archaeology, there's cultural anthropology, there's linguistic anthropology, and there is biological anthropology. Bioanth would be like if you watch the show Bones, right? There's forensics and stuff like that. Linguistic anthropology is understanding that language reflects culture. So when a language dies, there's a certain cultural legacy that may be hidden away, which is why it's hard for people to decipher ancient languages. So there is value in studying that stuff before it's gone. Language actually gives you a lot. For example, the word virtue comes from the Latin word vir, V I R, meaning man. So we can think about that. Or like the word
Wow.
hysteria comes from the word that means uterus.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, again, there's no like hardcore feminist agenda, but like there are a lot of like subconscious or unconscious ideas embedded in language that linguistic anthropologists are experts at exploring in ways that are pretty objective and not
Yeah.
nuanced in a particular way if they're good.
Yeah.
Archaeologists, I think, are similar. They have to be able to translate the languages in ways that, are true to what's being said, but also modern people can understand. And I really respect their art form a lot. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just I've been so excited. Like I told my son, I'm like, I have two girls coming on. And he's like, whoa. And I'm like, they're both scientists. And I'm like so excited. I'm like, you don't know how excited I am because I get to nerd out. Like just because, I'm as a librarian, when I started out as a volunteer. Like I was a PTA and I'm like, do you
Mm,
need anything to be done in the library? And at the time, the head of school said, I know you have a library at home. You're a book nerd. Can you get the kids to love books? And I'm like,
mm,
yeah. And I went into the library and like it was a dead sad place and no kids were coming in. And I asked the kids, I'm like, why don't you guys come in here? Because it's like my whole entire youth was the library. Like that, if I
same.
didn't have the library, I don't know what I would, it was a place for weirdos to go. Like,
Yep,
especially if
exactly.
you had no place else to go sometimes. It was like you had the library. And so the first thing I did, it was just like, how am I going to get kids to come in here? I just decided to do visual clickbait. And what I did was I would post pictures of Nazca lines, post pictures like I just printed out, laminated Easter Island, like post
Hmm.
pictures of terracotta army. I hooked them with
Love it.
science, like
Hmm.
totally with science first. And then and like I put planets, I put different things. And that was my hook, not let's read a book. People were like, how are you going to get kids in the library? How are you going to get them to love reading? First, you got to get them in. And my hook was science because kids from 2 to 11, and people said, how can you teach? And part of being a librarian, I was a teaching librarian too, which the kids could put on a post it like on the wall. What did they want to learn about? Because all the other teachers had to follow a curriculum. I could teach them whatever I wanted. And so they would have clusters of, we want to learn about this. And so I would go research. And then that week, we would teach all the kids because I taught every kid, every classroom came in from 2 years old to 11 years old. I would teach, but we would differentiate by ages so that it was toned down or talked down to something they could understand. And people said, how can you teach astrophysics to little kids? I'm like, if a 7-year-old kid can memorize all the scientific names of a dinosaur, they can understand the
Hmm.
concepts of astrophysics. And they're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I'm like, "Come, come." I would call in someone, I'm like, "Come." I'm like, I'd start asking the kids all these questions. I'm like, we did the whole what was that? Interstellar. I'm like, "Okay, so here's the black hole, here's a ship, here's a planet. Explain it, kids, to the teacher." And the kids explained it. They explained time differentiation and the event horizon, and they're like, "That's amazing." I'm like, kids are so amazing,
Mm.
but science will hook kids. So when people ask all the time, they're like, "How do I get my kids to like reading?" I'm like, "Buy them science books first. Let them be wondered by the world." But yeah, I mean, it's a science is such an amazing thing, and people that study it are my favorite people.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly encountered people saying, social sciences are not science, and I'm like, in a strange way, it's actually the hardest thing to do because you have to suspend your culturally sort of inundated beliefs, which is almost impossible. As much as we'd like to think human beings can be objective when we want, try to tell someone that, gender is a cultural idea and see how they react, or, that, the concept of murder is a cultural idea. That's an extreme, of course, but
Yeah,
it's a device to kind of call to attention that we are all enculturated from a young age. And that's why it's so hard to identify because it starts early. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's not about value judgment. It's about being able to take a step back and not absorb that all the time, right? Like a
yeah,
good investigator is as objective an observer as possible. And that's what attracted me to ethnographic research in general, um, strangely, is caring about humanity, but understanding humanity requires a certain degree of self removal from the scenario. And I like a challenge, but looking at your astrological chart, I suppose it also makes sense because you have Mercury, the planet of intellect and observation, ruling your fourth house, which has to do with formative years and hometown and kind of like how people form their very rudimentary ideas about life. And it also rules your house having to do with relationships and reflection with other people. So
yeah,
it makes a lot of sense to me that you'd be a natural scientist. People don't always think about, like, oh, Pisces as a rising sign would not make a person scientific. Pisces is about belief. And I always say, think about the other houses in the chart. Mercury rules the seventh house for a Pisces ascendant person, and the seventh house is very significant when it comes to what we're doing right now. So
yeah,
it makes a lot of sense to me that you'd be interested in having these discussions and probably intrinsically fascinated by sort of comparing and contrasting different perspectives and trying to make useful sense of it all. Like, what's the takeaway that can help us improve our lives?
yeah, yeah. I think that's important. I mean, but it's funny because if I'm going to look at it, retroactively, I wouldn't say though that I always had those same beliefs. Like,
Hmm.
obviously, things happen in life, and it kind of changes. We talked about it on when I was on Billy's podcast. I got diagnosed with MS like a couple of years ago, and um, there was a period of 48 hours where like the doctor came in and he's like, "I'm going to test you for cancer," and then he left for 48 hours. And I was like, and I just got, they just told me I'd had MS, so I'm kind of like processing like, what does that mean? What does that going to mean for my life? And now you're telling me I might have cancer, and then he was gone. Like, so 48 hours, I was like, oh my God,
That's a
what's going to
long
happen to
time
my
to just
child?
leave.
What's going to happen to this? It was just all this kind of stuff. But then afterwards, it made you kind of made me really, and then he came back and he's like, "Oh, you don't have cancer." I was like, "Look, bud, next time," I'm like, "take my blood and just go. Don't tell me what you're going to do." And then if something is bad, come and tell me after you've tested, or
Mm,
if it's great, tell me after, but don't tell me you're going to check me for something that's going to
mhm.
change my life and then disappear for 48 hours. And he's like, "Oh,
Right.
I didn't think about that." And I'm like, "Yeah, you think?" Um but
Yeah,
you
that
know,
might produce some anxiety.
right? That though, coupled with the working with the children,
Mm,
definitely changed my life, because all of a sudden I'm going back to, and this was something I just said to Sarah the archaeologist. I said, kids are still excited about that kind of stuff. They see the Easter Island, they're excited. They're like, whoa, how'd that get there? Where did we as humans stop thinking that was so cool? Like, but life gets involved, and I get that.
mhm.
And so I think that a
It
sudden
is cool.
reinvigoration of life, a lot of a huge part of that though had to do with those children,
Mm,
because it forced me to look at life again through their eyes. And it was like, yeah, I used to be super stoked about this kind of stuff. Where did I lose that in life?
mm,
And so I would definitely say that in the last couple of years, I've definitely got back in touch with being super excited about life, because it's like, yeah, it is really cool. Well, how did
yeah.
we forget,
You only
you know?
temporarily lost it. And I think that's a really important point for everyone to think about, myself included, is like human beings, we tend to see everything in the present as this like final permanent thing, right? I do it all the
Hmm.
time. When I'm sad, I'll be like, oh, everything's terrible. I missed this opportunity. I did that wrong, blah, 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 blah. And it feels so finite, right? But once you get past that moment, which can be very quickly, sometimes you realize. I had a friend say to me recently, if you're on this side of the soil, you still have an opportunity to do something, and observing other people. There's no timeline for anything. Forget about all that crap about at this age, a person should do XYZ. We have so many infinite examples of how unique those timelines are to each individual. The only thing stopping us a lot of the time, if not all the time, is our mentality. I'm not saying that social forces don't influence these things, but ultimately, are we going to give it our best, or are we just going to sit down and go, blah, apathy? You know what I mean? And like,
Yeah.
I can say that as someone who has issues with depression and apathy and trauma. Like, I'm not here to judge anyone. If anything, I'm empathizing with people who experience that. And I still experience that all the time, all the time. But at some point, I realized that it's worth trying to just do the things I'm passionate about, even if I'm not doing it perfectly in my mind, or, not meeting some bizarrely idealistic goalpost. It feels better to try than it does to just sit on the sidelines and go, well, this sucks. And
Yeah.
I can't speak to your experience with illness, and I hope I don't sound belittling there. I have other chronic health problems, not MS, though. Um, I can't speak to that because there is a mind body connection.
It's funny, like, I haven't had an attack since, and then the only attack I had was I went blind in an eye for like 6 months. And um we only found out because, like, I woke up one day and I was like blind in one eye, and then I said to my son, I'm like, hey, Google what's wrong with me. And he came back and he's like, you're having a stroke. And I was like, oh my God. And so, like, I called the hospital. I'm like, I'm having a stroke. I'm coming in. And I get down there, and they're like, okay, we're sending you to the eye doctor. I'm like, no, I need to see a cardiologist. They're like, why? You said your eye's having a problem. I'm like, yeah, but my kids looked it up. They're like, yeah, we're sending you to the eye doctor. And the first eye doctor was like, just it seems weird. Just put some drops in it and come back in a couple of days. Told me nothing. And then it was only by a second opinion that she said, I believe you have optic neuritis. You should go to a neurologist. And they tested me. And the first thing that they said, and you'll understand this, they gave me all these lists of medicines. And they
Mm-hmm.
said, if we have 16 different treatments for it, this first treatment, it has a 30% efficacy rate, but you're going to lose all your hair. I'm like, yeah, just move on to the next one. And they're like, this one has a 40% efficacy, but you're going to get skin cancer. I'm like, move on to the next one. And so they went through all these things and all these side effects seemed horrible. And I said, let me ask you a question. I'm like, are any of these things going to prevent MS attacks? They're like, no. And I said, okay, so if I get an MS attack in the future, what will you do? They're like, we'll do what we're doing now, treating you with heavy doses of steroids. And I said, and that's it. They said, yeah, that's it. And I'm like, so if I don't take all this medicine, it's not going to prevent it. And you don't know when I'm going to have an attack. And they're like, no. And I'm like, and if I have an attack, you're going to treat it the same way. They're like, yeah. I'm like, so why should I take all this medicine? They're like, because it could help. I'm like, yeah, but you're saying it could help, but all these other bad things, I'm going to go bald, on top of it. Not that there's
Right.
anything wrong with people being bald, but still, I'm a little vain. I like hair, so it's like,
I have a
I don't want to
weirdly
take all
shaped
those
head. I don't
things.
want to be bald.
I know I have a weird shaped head too.
I'm just
So
weird in
I,
general.
I talked to this one doctor and she changed my life with what she said. She's like, I went to school for Western medicine, and Western medicine teaches us if you have a problem, we're going to treat your symptoms. She's like, inside of me, I believe in Eastern medicine, where
Yes.
let's find the root cause of the problem.
Preventative medicine.
So I said, well, what if I change my lifestyle? I'm like, what if I change my surroundings? What if I feng shui my house? What if I eat better? Will all
Change
that,
your
what if I
diet,
go out and get
Ayurveda.
vitamin D? It's been three
I don't
years. I've
know.
not had an attack. So is there something to be said about that, like changing your mindset, changing your mentality? And is that
Yes.
not energy? I just
Yep.
posted something yesterday showing brain activity, and it's just all electrical charges, right? So it's
Hmm.
like, who's
Hmm.
to say that we can't, by positive thinking or manifestation, who's to say that we can't do those things,
May I
that we can't
interject?
change? Yes, please.
Mythologically, Jupiter or Zeus, what did he do? He sent bolts of lightning to change things, right? And astrologically, what does Jupiter represent? Serendipity, change, expansion, possibilities, faith, and the power of that to alter our reality. So I think that's really powerful. It can also represent justice. So if we're trying to set things in balance, I think sometimes, ironically, grasping things with a looser grip, not trying to control everything, not trying to feel like we know everything, and just kind of trying to trust that maybe something okay is possible, there's a greater power in that than we think. I think what you're
Yeah.
saying about mentality is really powerful. And I always tell my clients, look, I know it's a hard sell to tell people to believe in something really positive, being certain, but if you can get yourself to a point of neutrality, that's actually really powerful. Because most people tacitly believe something negative is going to happen all the time, right? And I understand why, right? Like I grew
Yeah.
up in a
Yeah.
very fraught environment myself where negativity was logically inevitable to some extent, but I am here talking to you because at some point I started to believe that something else was possible and worth thinking about. And I really do think that that is the difference. Um, it's not to say that there aren't other factors, but it is very powerful. And I think most people who have been through different challenges in life will tell you that. Even, you know, physicians will tell you what gets people through health crises often is just the belief that they can get through it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot. I'm I would probably classify myself as agnostic,
Mhm.
open-minded, but I do believe in a lot of Buddhist philosophies. And I think I think that my son is coming by with a cat. I believe in a lot of philosophies, and one that changed my life was hearing, we are the cause of our own suffering.
Mhm.
Life game changer. Game changer for me personally. Um, and just realizing that one statement alone
Mhm.
absolutely changed the whole mapping of my head.
Yeah.
because then I started to realize, like, if I was upset by somebody or if I was offended by somebody, it made me start to question other things. And like I had a conversation with somebody else where he's like, I was really upset about this person because they did this and this. And I said, you know what your problem is? You had expectations. I said, you had expectations of people.
True.
And when you have expectations, they will disappoint you a lot of the times. I said, just
Mhm.
be open. And he's like, I don't know how to be open. I said,
Mhm.
it, I don't know how I made that changed, but it wasn't like I'm going to consciously make that change, but maybe it was, but it was just realizing that, yeah, I am the cause of my own suffering. If I'm sad about something, it's like how I'm taking it. If I've been offended by somebody, it's how I took it. Um, and
Yes.
just changing that alone.
Right? Maybe it's an experiment to just say, well, what if I draw back for a second and think about it as a matter of choosing perspective? It seems very scientific to see it as an experiment to just say, what if I suspend my initial emotional response to something and just think about, like, what does that do to my experience? Is it really additive or helpful to an experience to get angry? It's not to say you shouldn't suppress those emotions, right? I think witnessing those emotions is important, but not attaching yourself to them, right? Like not having particular expectations. That's about attachment. So I think there's an important distinction. I'm sorry. Oh my God. The astrologer in me wants to say, I'm ruled by Jupiter. I'm going to sound preachy, but I will always underline everything I say with, if it doesn't resonate, just disregard. I don't think I have the answers. I just have thoughts and I hope they're helpful sometimes. Um, if you're attached to a particular outcome, being disappointed is almost inevitable. Just like, if you feel upset by something in the moment, why not let yourself feel the totality of that emotion and then let it go and let it pass? A lot of the time, I can get really upset, and then the next day, I'm like pretty much fine. It's suppressing that emotion, trying to rationalize that I don't feel anything that causes me to hold on to it. And like I think a lot of human problems could be sort of mitigated by acknowledging in the moment, but also putting it in the proper context of like not overvaluing a passing fleeting emotion. I think there's this pressure in our culture to identify the self with our emotions and thoughts in the moment,
Yeah.
and that causes so much confusion.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely, I think one of the things about that, of just kind of recognizing it too, is like, why are you scratching the chair, my dear? So it's funny. I have a cat. His name is Nine. I'll just show him really quickly.
Oh, that's okay. My cat was
This is
hanging out
Nine.
before too. Oh, hi.
And he's named Nine because we found him, all the animals in this house are rescues, but we found him on the anniversary of King Rama IX's death. We found
Oh,
him on that day. So we just named him Nine. So,
love it.
um, but, a lot of times I learn things or I reevaluate how I feel about something just having a kid, because a kid will
Mm,
ask me a question. I'm like, oh, that's a good question. I don't, know how I feel about that. Or even, the kids in the library, sometimes they're like, I feel angry. And I always tell them, I'm like, feel angry. I said, but I said, give it a minute. Give yourself a minute to be really angry. Give yourself 5 minutes if you need to be really angry. But then afterwards, think about, why are you angry? What caused you to be angry? Is there something that you could do to change that? If somebody, like, kid problems, this friend doesn't want to hang out with me today. Like yesterday she wanted to hang out and I'm angry, and I'm like, you could be angry and you could feel hurt, but what can you do about it? Well, I could tell her I feel bad. You could tell her. And what if she says she doesn't care? Then I could go find somebody else to play with. Exactly. Right? There's solutions, but you have to kind of like, it's helpful to look at what the issue is, what made you angry.
yes.
For me, I always say, is there any benefit to hold on to it for me? And I
Hmm.
always find that there's no benefit. Like I always like tell my son, I'm like, if something bothers you, and I tried to tell my mom, but she's so set in her ways because she gets stressed out about a lot of stuff. She worries about a lot of stuff. And I said, why do you worry all the time? I said, Mom, you're in your elder years. You should just be thinking of lovely things, not on your way
Mm,
out, but you know what I'm saying? Like you should be filled with lovely thoughts and
yeah.
not worried about stuff all the time that you have no control over. Like you're listening to politics. Why? It doesn't affect you in any way and it's making you so upset. Why are you listening to it? You know, just
Yeah.
let it be, and I found that that's so kind of helpful, and some people are like, "Yeah, but that, you know, you're just ignoring stuff." I'm like, "I don't think that I'm ignoring. I'm looking at what can I learn from it?" Like it's and you might have a lot to say about this too. Past relationships. A lot of people don't get along with people in their that they've broken up with. And I've had conversations with people and I'm like, I'm friends with pretty much every ex I've had and I'm their biggest champion because and it's not because I'm any better or any noble, but I just think if you love somebody and you cared about somebody, just because your energy is no longer aligned, does that make them any less of the person that you admired when you first met them, right? It's just
Mm,
the relationship has changed. And so I could still honor that. And so I feel so fortunate. Like there's maybe like one person I don't talk to and they know why. So but other than that, you know, it's like you can because that energy is there. So it's like why would you be upset? I know people that are still upset with their exes and it like broke up 20 years ago and I'm like, why are you holding on to that? Like
right.
why don't you look at the lesson like did you change as a person coming out of that? Did you learn something? Like, even if you learned what you don't want to hang out with or what energies you don't want. So I think that if you just reframe something,
Hmm.
it's it's still the same thing, right? But having perspective, which is
Yeah.
why I think astrology is important. Having
Hmm.
perspective, you could still look at something, you're just shifting the way you look at it, and that can give you greater knowledge of just dealing with life in general.
Absolutely. I agree. People don't always realize that when you look at a person's birth chart, you're actually able to see facets of how that person experienced their family members, their authority figure, their nurturing figure, their sibling figures. Um, and a lot of the time, that's very rich and interesting when you look at families. Personally, I don't have siblings, so I don't have that luxury of comparison, but most people I know
Yeah.
do have siblings, and it's like we can even start as simple as the moon sign showing how different siblings experience their mother figure. And it kind of explains how you can all grow up in the same household and have different takeaways from it. And they're all valid perspectives, right? It's not about gaslighting people out of what their perspective is. It's about saying, let's witness what you feel, what your perspective is of what you grew up with, and then let's figure out the most effective way to navigate that for you. And for me personally, I experienced as a Capricorn moon a feeling of isolation, a feeling of deficit with nurturance. How did I deal with that? It's interesting because everyone who knows me is like, you're so warm, you're so nice, animals love you, kids love you. And it's like, I worked really hard to be able to stay open hearted in that way because I was actually really shut down in that way from a really young age. And that's not like a flex or whatever. It's just I'm trying to share my heart because I think that's the most effective way to help other people who might feel like they're alone in these experiences. And 9 times out of 10, we're not alone at all. Also, it's not always wrong to not be friends with every ex, right? Like you said, you have like at least one ex, they know why you're not friends with them. It's not because you're terrible necessarily. Sometimes a relationship is toxic and a person is unrepentant. They're not willing to look at their own sort of issues or take responsibility. And the only recourse we have with that person is distance. It's not spite, anger,
Yeah.
hatred. It's
Yeah.
not negative
They're just like
attachment.
it's just indifference.
It's
It's like
wall.
I don't want that energy near me. Like I
Exactly.
wish them nothing bad. I don't wish them anything.
Exactly.
It's just they're over there. Our timelines have diverged and we're not going to cross paths anymore. And I'm cool
Yes.
with that. Um and there's no and there's been other cases where, you know, it's like people are like, "Oh, why don't you hate this, but you should hate this person. I'm like, why should I? Like, why should people hate, anybody? Like, it's just
Yeah, I've gotten that with family where people are like, "Why don't you hate your parents?" And I'm like, "That's a really
right.
loaded question."
That's
Um,
such a loaded question.
yeah, a lot of people have said to me, "I would hate them if I were you."
I've talked to people about this recently because it's just something that, like, occurred to me not too long ago, because generational trauma, I'll be honest, it wasn't something that I ever looked into. I'd heard it over the years,
Mhm.
but it was I that the time that I heard it was at a time that people were labeling so many different things that I just thought, okay, it's just another label. I
Right.
didn't think too much of it, right? And so, but then I saw this video, and that's why sometimes social media is really great. And it was I think he was Vietnamese. He was a Vietnamese uh, young man that was growing up in the States, but he just kind of had the camera away. You couldn't see his mom, but he's having a conversation with his mom. She's Asian. I could just totally, I was like, oh man, I've had these conversations with my mom. Right. And to see it from an outsider's perspective, all of a sudden, I was like, oh, like, I get that now. And then I went back, and I don't have any siblings either, so maybe that's also why we get along so
Okay.
well too. We understand the only child syndrome. Um,
Mhm.
but I remember talking to my cousin, and I was like, "Damn, we growing up, we were so angry sometimes with our parents when we were teenagers, right?" And I said, and I told him, I'm like, we were so angry because we grew up watching Cosby, watching Family Ties, and we were like, how come you guys aren't like those parents? How come we can't like totally up at school and then come and tell you and you'll scoop us ice cream and everything's okay? Like, why is there like shouting going? Why am I being, this and that? And then I just realized one day, I'm like, because my mom didn't grow up watching Cosby Show and Huxtable. My mom didn't have TV. My mom had a mother that had five other younger children that my mom got forced to babysit because she was the oldest. And it
Mm.
was like, she didn't have that. And so I told my cousin, I'm like, dude, we've been so hard on our parents, but because we think that we just, it's not that we think or we assume, it just seems like, okay, well, obviously they had a childhood like ours. No, they didn't at all. So understanding that helped me understand my mother and appreciate her so much more instead. And that was healing. A lot of people say, oh, I suffer from generational trauma, and they get more upset with their parents. Like, how could they put us through that? For me, it was the opposite effect, where I was like, it was so much more healing because I was like, oh, she wasn't upset with me. It's like, this is just the
Right.
tools that she was given. And it was something that you were saying, talking about siblings, because I read a study recently too, and they were talking about even if you have twin siblings with the same DNA, they have two completely different experiences growing up. Even if they're in the same house, they're not the same. And it's because it's accumulation of all their experiences in and out, but also energy, stars, who knows, like
Yes.
if they were born a minute different than their sibling, is there something to that? Because how else can you explain as a scientist that you have two twins that are completely different, you know? And there's are twins that are similar, you know,
Oh, sure.
but
And I guess the similarities and the differences are both equally salient because the focal point is there on them. But I would say their differences can be maybe that's why there are astrologers out there who really go down to the nitty gritty, down to degree and what those degrees symbolize. Um, with most people, I don't talk about that just because it's too overwhelming when you get into hundreds and hundreds of variables. But, like,
yeah,
there are 12 signs of the zodiac, yes, but like there are 30 degrees per sign, and every degree has a symbolic value. And there are decans, which are, three per sign because it comes from the root for 10. So every 10 degrees, and there's a planetary ruler for that. So there are like subsections of subsections to analyze. And for the more mystical minded in the 1920s, the Sabian symbols were devised, which a psychic woman channeled symbolic imagery for all 180 degrees of the zodiac. And so, like, you can even people born a couple minutes apart with their rising ascendant degree, 1 degree apart, that would change what that symbolic image is. And you can get really down to the numerology of degree numbers and all kinds of stuff, declination. And um, personally, that's not necessarily my wheelhouse, but I'm aware of it and I understand why it exists, because the point is we all have a subjective experience, and I think it's valuable to discuss. The hard part is not attaching ourselves too strongly to it, because it's hard to have this conversation sometimes and not argue, right? Like, if I experienced a family member as abusive, for example, and someone else doesn't, and we talk about that person, it can get heated really quickly if I stay attached to my personal subjective feeling. But if I just kind of acknowledge, like, that's a feeling that I had at a particular time, it's not necessarily true or untrue, it just is, it's a little bit easier to listen. Um, that's the standpoint that I take. It's not denial. It's witnessing as many variables as possible without having a strong value judgment. That's helped me personally as someone who comes from a lot of traumatic experiences in my family line, addiction and abuse and all these things. It's not pretending it didn't happen. In fact, I am probably the person in the family line that looks at it the most and just sees it for what it is. But I also don't react super emotionally because I've taken the time to process it and kind of try to put it all into perspective. Like, I can have compassion for the people who have experienced these issues while also acknowledging maybe that they've hurt me. And one
Mhm.
is not more important than the other, right? They're hurting, I'm
Yeah.
hurting. And
Yeah.
we can't always resolve that either. And that's kind of the tragic element of life, is like, can want to. We can care for one another in families or in social groups of any kind, but we're not always given the tools or the opportunities to resolve that. But, like, I think having the ability to witness as objectively as possible and with compassion is really powerful as human beings. And for me, astrology has been a tool, a symbolic framework to do some of that work. I'm not saying it's necessary for everyone, but that's a value that I've found in it personally. Sorry, that's heavy. Everything I say is like kind of heavy, but you're also really good at bringing up subject matter that resonates for me. So I appreciate that.
I'm so happy he suggested that we be friends.
Sometimes he has a point, I guess.
Yeah, right? Um, the one thing that, that he and I have been friends for about 20 years now, and, um, I've always, and it's funny because there's times it's like you have certain connections with friends. There's been many times in 20 years that I'll just be living life and maybe I haven't talked to him in a couple of days, but I feel like I'll send a message like, "Hey, are you good right now?" And he's said, "No, not right now." Or, he'll say like something's going on, and it's happened so many times
Yeah.
that it makes me think like, "Oh, maybe there's something to all that." And I have it with other friends as well where I'm just like, I haven't heard from this person in a long time, and they're not like a person that's historically had something going on in their life where I just feel
Yeah.
it. Um and maybe there's something like us being introverts that a lot of times, maybe when you're young, you stand back and you observe. I would
Mhm.
consider myself an observer more than an engager. I don't actually talk to people a lot. Like, I talk to you like this because
Yeah.
it's just be people. Like, be people, that's it, nonstop. But
I'm the same way. You would not believe I'm the same way. I don't, like, I seem nonverbal to some people, so
it's funny, like I told you, I worked at a school for several years, and I've had coworkers that have told other coworkers, they're like, "She's quiet and distant." And they're like, "What? Lisa?" They're like, "Yeah, she's very quiet and distant." And I'm
Mhm.
like, "I've just not opened up to that person." And that's it. I'm most of the time I just like to observe. Um and maybe that's oh, okay, this is something I
If you see
definitely
my
want to
eyes
talk to you
darting,
about.
it's because I'm looking at your chart while you're talking.
This is definitely something I want to talk to you about. This is because this I've talked to a lot of people about this. What are your thoughts on high frequency energy people? There was
That's a
something
great
on that
question.
I hadn't heard about it, and then I had a friend Nina, and she studies all that kind of stuff, and she said,
Mm,
"Have you read much about high frequency people?" And I'm like, no. And she said, I should. And the reason why was like, I've got 800,000 rescue animals. And it's literally because they just show up at my door. And even
mhm.
when I was working at the school, they show up in front of the library. Right now, I have 3 rodents in this room right now. I have a cat, I have a turtle, I've got a pigeon hospital upstairs. I've got like, you know, tons. I think I've got
I don't
19
mean to laugh,
animals and
but
they're
a
all
pigeon
rescues.
hospital is a funny phrase, you must admit.
Yeah, well, it didn't start. It started out like it didn't intend to be a pigeon hospital, but what ended up happening was I saw a pigeon one day just spinning around like in
Oh,
circles. And I'm like, why is he spinning? And I looked and it said that he had paramoxavirus and that he
oh,
was probably going to die in 5 days. And so the idea of an animal being weak and then some predator attacking him.
right.
Like when
Well,
you're
it's
already weak and you're sick.
preventable.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, I'll just at least cage him so that he dies in peace without any trauma.
Oh, yes.
And then he didn't die. Like he got better. And
Yay.
like then it was then the but it took like 6 months and for he had a
Mm,
neurological disease. As a result of the paramoxavirus, the side effect was he got a neurological disease. I can
mm.
understand this having MS, right? So I was like, I'm gonna save this bird,
Oh,
like whatever we're gonna do. And he couldn't control his head to eat. So every time he went
oh.
down to peck, his head would go this way. So
How
he
did
was
he eat
starving to death.
then?
So for the first like 3 months that he was in a cage, I would go up several times a day and I would just kind of cup his head like I was a cobra so that like if he knocked his head up, because his head would go all the way back
Oh,
180
got it.
degrees.
Okay, so you
And so if
kept
I
him kind of
cupped it,
stationary.
yeah, and so he could eat and he started
Oh,
eating, he
poor
started
baby.
getting stronger. And now his name is he's I've had him for a year. His name is Lucky Mike Tyson. And at in the morning, in
I'm
the
not gonna ask.
mornings, I
I'm
let
just
him
glad you
go.
helped him.
I let him go. Well, because he's a fighter. Like he should have died. He just should have died. In the mornings, I let him go.
Are you
He
sure not
goes
talking about me?
he just goes and flies around and at night he comes back and I put him inside. He likes to
Oh,
sleep inside at
he
night and then
feels
in the
safe.
morning I let him go. So that's Lucky Mike Tyson. But so every time now I see the birds, the spinner birds, I always take them. Some don't make
Yeah,
it,
because
but
now you
right now
know
I
how
have
to handle.
4. Now yeah, now I know
I
how to
think
handle. So now I have 4 upstairs.
well, that says a lot, I think, about human maladies too, right? Because, like, I mean, I was joking mostly when I'm like, are you sure you're not talking about me? But, like, when people talk about, like, I've heard people say really unkind things about, like, oh, well, that person has childhood trauma, so they're a lost cause. They're never going to get better. And it's like, that's actually patently untrue. All it takes a lot of the time is a little bit of understanding and goodwill and support. Kindness has done more for me than therapy in some instances, and that's no
Yeah.
exaggeration, right? um
Yeah.
because if you had a deficit of empathy and kindness and suddenly you're shown pure human kindness, that can help you rewire your mind to believe, well, I see it now, experience it, so it's possible, and that can open up an entire new world for you. And, like, I'm not saying animal consciousness is the same, I don't know, but I think
Yeah.
mammals, well, birds aren't mammals, I guess all creatures on some level feel things. We feel vibrations, we feel empathy or something. And maybe just the experience of feeling safety, the absence of threat, and, like, you know, in most cases in nature, that bird probably would have felt severe threat, being unable to control its movements or whatnot. That would have been a clear
Yeah.
signal to predators. The absence of
Yeah.
that allowed it to thrive and survive
Yeah.
and heal. I think that's a really powerful narrative, even for humans to say, wow, when you're in it, when you're in that moment of shakiness, it's really hard to see beyond it. But sometimes all it takes is a caring person or even animals sometimes. My cat, I had surgery a couple years ago and my cat helped me psychologically cope through. I hated being bedridden, but my cat would like take her little paw and boop me on the nose and like she
They're
has like a
terribly intuitive.
yeah, she has a
I
little
think
sense of
animals are terribly
humor.
intuitive. Yeah.
Yeah, and like she kept me feeling like amused and like able to handle it and it was just like wow, I think that
I
care
think that we're able to fully understand the consciousness level of animals.
me
Like, I
either.
know a lot of people try to explain it, but I don't think that, it's just the other
No,
day, and this was a funny story. My son opened the door to go outside, and all I heard him say was, "Mom, there's a dog here to see you." And I said,
I'm
"What?"
picturing a
He's
dog
like,
like
"There's a
ringing the doorbell.
Well, so, like, I said, "What are you talking about?" So, like, I followed him and I looked around him and there was just this dog and the dog made eye contact with me and then walked around my son directly at me and I'm like, "I don't know who this dog is." And I said, "Do you need help?" And then he went and he laid like next to my car and he was like limping and everything. Never saw the dog in my life. I live deep into like a street. So it's not like the main road or anything. Um, and that happened. I don't how no just before I recorded this podcast, I was upstairs in the pigeon hospital, like making sure everybody had food. And this one pigeon flew in front of me and I saw and it just landed in front of me. It was really strange because all the other pigeons were doing other things, but it landed right in front of me and I looked at it and wrapped around its feet was thread and it was so tight on all its fingers that it was if it's left on, it was going to lose all its little thing and
Oh
it was so
no, it
tight.
would cut off
And I
the
was like,
circulation.
"Oh, yeah." It was already bulging at certain places and it looked so terrible. So like I
Ouch.
threw a shirt over it. I grabbed it. And as I was like trying to cut it and it was squeaking a little because it was so
Mm.
tight on there. But I was just talking to him and I'm like, "Look, I know it hurts right now and I'm not trying to hurt you, but this is going to feel so much better." And then he just like relaxed. He like totally relaxed and it I had to do it slow and I was like thinking I'm like, "Am I going to be late for Diana's thing?" I'm like, she would totally understand if I told her like a pigeon was going to lose his fingers.
Yeah. I used to work in an animal
That makes so much
and
sense.
an animal
That
shelter.
makes sense.
Yeah, I love
See?
animals.
That makes a lot of sense though. I mean, do you think that I always tell people like I prefer animals over humans.
I mean, I try not to lead with that, but because it makes me sound really antisocial, but I worked at specifically a cat shelter because I love cats so much. I love all animals, but
Yeah.
cats are incredibly emotionally intelligent and they express so much with their body language. I feel like as much as I love language and wordplay and poetry and everything, like at the end of the day, I feel like cats are usually better communicators than most humans. And
Have you ever done your cat's chart?
oh yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. So, what
Mhm.
did that because I mean, you know what? I mean, that may like some people might laugh at that, but you're
We
spending
both laugh
energy
at it and
all
answer
this
it
time.
honestly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right? But I mean, but so many but you're literally spending all this time with this creature, this being, another earthling
Yes.
that's got all this energy. Like we're
Yeah.
always like people are always like, "Oh, they're aliens and stuff." I'm like, "Have you guys looked at some of the stuff on our own planet? Why are you looking at other planets? Like there's some
Yes.
cool stuff on our planet. Look at the stuff that's underwater."
Yes, and I think we've barely scratched the surface of all of that. And, a friend of mine was like, don't you think we deserve to understand what's in space? I said, absolutely, but I think we should have a better grasp on what's going on here before we have the business to take ourselves out there because it seems logical that if we don't understand our existence now, what the hell are we doing trying to go someplace else? That's like saying, I don't know what's going on in my house, but I'm going to go to someone else's house. Your energy
Yeah.
is not clear, right? You're confused. And to me, that seems like a contagion of chaotic energy. But I
Yeah.
guess we're all self determining beings for a reason. So I'm going to put the most positive spin on it I can without being delusional. I can say that the animals in my life have been very perceptive and helpful little beings. You know, like I feel like my cat can read me better than most people can. Like when I'm sick, sometimes I don't even know I'm about to get sick, and my cat knows. She doesn't just sit in bed next to me in the morning normally, but if I'm like about to be ill, I don't know if it's a scent thing or some other thing that I don't perceive clearly, but she always knows and keeps her eye on me and seems concerned and looks at me a certain way. And I'm just like, that can't be taught or requested.
Right?
And I value it so much. And I think in part, maybe that developed because I have given her attention and love and care. I don't just treat my animals in my home as, you know, go outside and I think a lot of people do that, and it's
Yeah.
not necessarily bad, but I think there are a lot of bonds that we can make and things that we can learn from each other that are really great.
I think it's also viewing it as a pet versus as this other creature, this earthling that's living with you, this other earthling. When I contextualize it that way, it's like I've got all these different earthlings that are living with me. You know, and I've said this to my son a million times. I'm like, "Do you?" Because I'm stupid and I'm nerdy, and sometimes I'm just sitting there. I'm like, "Do you realize, Angus, that we've got like 3 different species of rodent in here right now? We've got a feline, we've got a bird, we've got a turtle, all in this bedroom right now." And he's just like, "You're so weird, mom." I'm like, "No, but
Like, what
that's
are
like
you, stone?
really cool." Like, it's just cool to think like we just all get along and we're just this whole little family. Like what you said, when my son was a baby, um, there was one day that the cat came up and woke me up, and he was sleeping next to me and woke me up, and the cat never woke me up like that. And then right afterwards, my son threw up, and it was the only time as a baby he ever threw up. But the cat woke me up to tell me my son was gonna throw up, and then she just stood guard the whole night. Even when I was sick this last week, my cat came twice, 9, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm dying."
Oh, that I think that's on Pro's Circle your house, but
I wonder if there's something to that because I have ridiculous irrational fears. Like
hmm.
Corrigan makes fun of me because I've had an irrational fear for as long as he's known me of spontaneous combustion. And then he sent me something that just like further evidence. Like there was like a case in Florida, like he remembered when he was young, and like he sent me like some news article. I'm like, see, like who's to say that that can't happen? We have energy in us, we have body heat. Who's to say? But then there's
Sometimes
also
I
other
think
stupid
people
things.
cope with their own insecurities and fears by projecting it onto others who are more forthcoming about them, because I think like what is labeled as like a hypochondria of sorts, whatever manifestation it takes, is very intrinsically human. I think it's common across the board with all of us.
Mine are just like super irrational ones.
Well, I mean, sure. I think spontaneous combustion is fascinating. I was obsessed with it as a kid because I thought it was hilarious. So I can sort of understand that mindset, but I personally would
Yeah.
not harp too much on a fear that someone else has necessarily. But I also understand from the astrological point of view a person who has a strong Pluto signature in their chart. It's their role to sort of like try to erode the neuroses or fixations people have. And it can seem painful, but it's really designed to help that person clarify things and ultimately feel more sort of clear and strong about who they are, independent of those other things extraneous to the core nature. But amid the sort of journey, it feels like that person's just being a jerk.
Yeah.
And I guess there's no value judgment to be made, right? Like people don't always think I'm a nice person either, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I think I'm very considerate and compassionate and whatnot, but also I suppose I don't placate people too much, or like I'll never lie if I'm asked for my opinion, right? And
Yeah.
like people think it's rude that if they're like, "How are you doing?" and I'm having a bad day, I'll just say, "I'm not having a very good day. What about you?" And they're like, "That's rude." And I'm like, "What? I'm not
I think it's
projecting it."
strange that people find people being blunt rude.
Yeah,
Like, I have a lot of Dutch friends, and
just being
Dutch
honest.
I think Dutch people are very just very blunt when they say things,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
people
it's
are like, "Oh,
Americans that don't
Dutch
like
people
it.
are so rude." I'm like, "Dutch people aren't rude at all." I'm like, "They're very blunt." I
Yes,
appreciate that. I
yes.
lived in LA a little bit. I'm from San Diego, and people always
Okay,
think, San Diego is very similar to LA." I'm like, that's like saying Detroit is the same as Chicago because 'cause they're
right,
across the river from yeah,
right.
the
There
lakes
may be
from each
vague
other.
similarities, but they're
Yeah.
not
But I
identical at
said
all.
the overall vibe or energy I got in LA,
Hmm.
it wasn't something that I cared for.
You'll get
And that could,
gaslit.
it's just, there was a couple of things I felt like so many people were inauthentic, and
Hmm.
I think it's, and I don't think it was like in a harmful way. And then I'm not talking about just like, I'm talking about across the board. If you go into like Denny's, you've got a lot of people that are working like as service people as they're trying to break into acting or break into something else, right? And so
Yes.
there's a lot of disappointments that can go in that as well. You go to casting calls, you don't get whatever. But at the same time, a lot of people that are there working there trying to make it big also know that at any moment there could be a big break of somebody that they don't recognize. So there's always that, I'm going to be happy, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. And sometimes as a person like you or me, you could feel like, wait a second, I could feel the energy doesn't match what they're showing. And
Right.
that made me sad. It made me sad when I was there because I felt like a lot of people weren't able to just be themselves for whatever reason. Not that it was like maliciously, I'm trying to pretend to be something I'm not. It was just maybe they
Yeah.
felt they couldn't because they might lose a part, they might lose a break, they might lose whatever. So it made me feel sad. Whereas in
Yeah.
San Diego, everybody's just like, it is what it is. That was like kind of how we just growing up. That's what everyone always said. It is what it is. It is what it is. And that's a kind of nice mentality to have, I think. I think it's a very helpful one. It is what it is.
Yeah, I think so too. There's so many variables though, right? Like the word intersectionality gets thrown around a lot, but I think it is relevant just in the most broad strokes sense of like, social class is part of the scheme, and sort of like what you're, because like I am often mistaken for someone who came from more privilege than I did. I came from a pretty poor background. I was just always a really good student, and my vocabulary was good, and to be honest, on a superficial level, I'm like 5'10" and thin, so like people automatically assume a tall thin white girl comes from a certain background, even though I was like from kind of what people from privilege would call the hood, although
Yeah.
it wasn't really that. But you know what
Yeah.
I mean? There's more nuance and whatnot
Yeah.
behind these things. The superficial stuff doesn't really stick. Um, I always am more interested in getting to know who people are behind all of that, right? Like when they're not afraid for their survival. Like I have this very icy exterior that I've developed just to survive, but like who I am beyond that is like a pretty compassionate person. And I feel like that's closer to my core self. And I think a lot of people, not to name names, are similar, right? Who grew up in similar circumstances or like learned that they had to be self protecting, and it's not arrogance and it's not hatred or whatever. So I think there's always context for everything. There's always a deeper
Yeah.
story. Like my mom's an immigrant, but like not everyone knows that, right? Or like there's always more to everybody's story. So one thing I appreciate about you is I always just kind of felt like on a gut level that you're interested in getting to know that stuff about people, like not just what they think, but like why they think that, like what
Yeah.
informs them as a person. And I love that.
Yes. I think that's so fascinating to me because it's like we all have different experiences, and it's like we could study the same thing, go to the same school, and have completely different
Yeah.
experiences. And I like knowing what are all the nuances. And it's like I could disagree with somebody completely. I have friends that are like really into politics, and I don't necessarily agree with their politics, but I appreciate their passion and what are the things that led them to go down that route. I also appreciate, though, that they're open minded to hearing other arguments. I like having my best friend Marty on this podcast a lot because he always has the exact opposite opinion. But it's like you said,
I
it's
love
like
it.
I learn from him. Like I brought him on because I wanted to talk to him recently about AI because
Mm,
I'm on the fence. I find good things
that's a
about
very
it
good
and I
point.
find bad things about it, but I knew that he was going to have a very opinionated thought on it, and he did, and he brought all those opinionated things. And I was in. We had Desmond, who's our producer, and he's very pro AI. So we had one that was against, one that
Mm,
was pro, and me in the middle. And it was such a great conversation to me because I do want to hear everybody's take because I think that that's the most important thing. Give me context. I want to get every perspective. Like, I want to hear your side. Even if I don't agree with you, I want to hear your side because I still want to hear that perspective. Because I think when we have all the pieces, we can understand things better. Um,
I
and
agree.
and and sometimes that could be energy and things like that, and energy signs and whatever. When we were talking about cats and stuff too, um and you will probably agree with me, and some people will probably snicker at it, but would you say that you understand your cat? Like
Yeah.
when you hear certain meows, you know what
Mhm.
that means. And
Oh,
I've told people
yes.
that, they're like, oh, you talk cat. I'm like, if you threw a person into Guangzhou, China, and you just left them there for 10 years and they didn't speak Chinese when you threw them in there, after 10 years, even after 5 years, even after a year, they may not understand word for word what people are saying, but they're
Mhm.
going to understand something. It's going
Yes.
to be energy, it's going to be shift. So I can hear when I hear like 9, I know sometimes that he's like, I'm bored, or like sometimes I'm hungry, or where are you? When my son leaves for school every morning, only one cat comes up and he's like, later 9, and 9 goes, meow. And we always think it's funny. We're like, he's saying bye. It's like, so like he just views you as a member of the pack. We're like, I wonder where 9 thinks you go every day. But he knows, okay, you leave in the morning, he says bye, and then he seems to know when he's supposed to come home. So I'm like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
I
they
don't want to keep you so late. It's like midnight over
Oh
where
my
you
God, I
are.
could talk forever. Cats have a better internal clock than people. And it's funny because traditional astrologers, it's weird. People will say to me, well, I don't understand traditional astrology. They had all these seemingly disparate associations for things. And I'm like, it makes sense though. Like, cats were ruled by Saturn. Saturn rules time and habits and cycles and structure. Cats are sticklers for structure. It makes sense to
Yeah.
me. They always seem to have a better sense of time than I do. If I oversleep, my cat wakes me up to say, "Hey, feed us." Um,
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like I think these things are were originally based more on observation than we think,
Yeah.
and maybe our ideas of like sort of narrow, mundane, observational focus just don't encompass the way ancient people used to look at things, maybe more macrocosmically or thematically. But anyway, yes, cats certainly are fascinating creatures. My cat, I feel like I can read her and she can read me really well without
Yeah.
words, although she does understand certain words. And it's really nice to commiserate with other humans like yourself who are on that wavelength. But I feel like we're going to have like part 3 or 4 or whatever someday for these conversations. We could be more structured next time. I feel like this was very meandering, my fault perhaps, but
No, I love meandering conversations um, because there's always a surprise. You never know where they're gonna go, and that's kinda delightful. I love it's strange because I I have not officially gone to check if I am neurodivergent. However, me and Desmond, we both worked at an international school that is pretty big. It's a global international chain, and so they spend a lot of money in sending us to learn about special education needs and to be able to spot neurodivergency so that we can better help children. Right. So
love
many
that.
times we go to these things and it's funny because it's not just me, it's not just Desmond, it's like across the board. Tons of teachers are like looking at themselves after we're like
Right.
looking at all these signs and we're like, maybe I'm neurodivergent. And I remember, I said this on another podcast. I said I went to the special education's needs after a lecture, and I'm like, that lecture was so interesting. And I I told her, I'm like, there were so many things about it. I'm probably neurodivergent, right? And I said that to her, and she was like, yeah. And it was more like a yeah, you finally figured it out. We all knew you in the library were neurodivergent, right? But it was just like, but so many of us discovered it that way, and I think it's
Mm,
probably because our generation, they didn't look at that.
no,
Um,
girls
I don't
especially.
but it makes sense, right? It's like looking at astrology. When you look at it retroactively, you're like, "Oh, I get it now. I
Everything is
understand."
clear in retrospect, right? That's the hard part. And I think with neurodivergency, not that I'm an expert, but I do research and observe a lot, perhaps a symptom,
Yeah.
um, is that, you know, we all kind of just go through life, and human nature is adaptation, and we do the best we can. And if you grow up in a certain social context where there's not vocabulary or there's not apparent resources or anything, you do the best you can. And if you're a good student, which I imagine you were, and I was growing up, there's no clear impetus, right? Because like male neurodivergency was often marked by behavioral issues or academic issues, whereas a lot of the
Yeah.
time, masking socially is typical to female neurodivergency. And we do okay in school, if not better than average. And therefore, on paper, there's nothing to look at as a problem.
Yeah.
I think the social models have changed over time for the better to serve the needs of individuals, which is great. But
Yeah.
for me personally, I'm like, I don't know why people expect me to know how to remember where I put my keys just because I know where Pluto is right now by degree.
Yeah. It's funny though because Desmond, um, he asked me something recently too, because we had talked about this, and he said, "Do you think that um, kids are more prepared now because
Mm,
they're getting diagnosed and stuff? And do you think they're more prepared for the world?" And I said, it was an interesting conversation because I said, "Well, our generation, nobody told us we weren't diagnosed, so people adapted.
right.
So." When you're asking me, do I think that they're more prepared for the world now that it's been pointed out to them and somebody said, okay, this is what's wrong with you. Like sometimes not every school says that, but a lot of schools will say, well, this is what your issues are.
Yeah.
And it seems so textbook, and it's almost like the astrology thing. Then does that become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because you've just told this kid, here's all the things that are wrong with you. And this is, or was it better that you don't know and we raw dog it through life and and just but
It's a wash,
when
I
I
think.
look at when you look at the people when I look at the people that I know today are most likely neurodivergent, they're all very strong people, and they've gone through and
That's a good point.
they've made it. They've gone through it. Like
Yes.
and so I sit there and I'm like, well, to me it just shows neurodivergency is like being actually something that's really good because it shows resilience. Like maybe they're just determined, like, I'm just gonna keep trying till I get this right. So I don't know if it's more beneficial now that it's pointed out. Is is that gonna change? You know, what's that saying? The mere act of observing something changes it,
Yes, yes.
right?
And oh my goodness, that's another rabbit hole astrologically because I wrote a brief, intentionally brief Substack post about Venus and that archetype, which is basically the sociological axiom of I am who I think you think I am, and the constant hall of mirrors that the social world of humanity goes through and what that entails when it comes to neurodivergency is a very interesting conversation. But I think what you said was really important about, is it quote unquote better or worse to know or not know because people kind of made do. I think what it is we have to question, and I hate to sound, again, like I'm wearing a tinfoil hat, but like what benefits the quality of life of each person the most
Yeah,
now? We can't
yeah,
go back, right? I
yeah,
can I can criticize or value judge positively what I've been through in my past, but like presently, is a diagnosis for a young person nuanced in a way that says now we have the tools to help you succeed and to feel good about who you are, or now we're going to nuance this as you are limited and you
yeah,
cannot do XYZ because of ABC.
you're
And I
right.
think that's the important part is not so much like the diagnosis. It's like, how do you nuance that? Because
Yeah,
initially I had like, not to get too personal or whatever, I know we probably have limited time, but I have chronic health issues that started to manifest in my 20s and my life had to change radically. I used to ride my bike everywhere. I was a very active person, very impulsive, and I had to start planning a whole lot and thinking a whole lot more. And that was a drag at that age. At first, I was kind of pissed. I was kind of resistant to it. And I didn't really have anyone else to kind of give me context. But once I stopped thinking of it as like a death sentence and more of it as here's a framework for me to work within, and it's a challenge of my ability to strategize, it was like a paradigm shift. So I kind of think of it the same way with neurodivergency, because I may be one of those people on that list or whatever. Um, and I don't think about limitations so much as I think about what can I do to kind of take the best care of myself that I can and give the world the best that I can in return. And that's reciprocal energy. And like in the ideal world, we're all kind of able to give and take fairly equitably. I know that's very idealistic.
yeah,
That's me.
yeah. Yeah,
But
like he asked, he's like, would you have wanted to know? And I said, probably not. I said, I would want to know if I was neurodivergent Rain Man level, I would want to know
right.
because then I could go to Vegas. Like, and then life would be like a lot
Gold,
easier,
pile of
right?
gold.
That tell me about that. If I got that, let me know so I could go to Vegas now. But I said, I don't know if I don't know if I would want to know. Like,
Mm,
I think I've done all right. He's like, would you go get tested now? I'm like, I don't see what's the point of getting tested
mm.
now. Like we've studied it enough. We've gone to tons and tons of, yearly seminars and studies and, we could see, yeah, it's more likely. But I think just the realization of it though makes me more forgiving to myself because I could sit there and say, "Oh, well, I get that." I was a good student in classes that I liked, and I liked or respected the teacher. And if
Yes.
I didn't like or respect the teacher, and I was just talking to my son about this, um, and I just told him, I told him last night, I said I had to take biology over because I'm going to put this out there. He just got an A plus on his biology final. And I was super stoked because this is the first year he's like really into like being studious. It's his freshman year.
Biology is so cool. There's so many ways that can go. Ecology or yeah,
I
anthropology.
failed. I failed the first time I took biology.
Your teacher
And
sucked.
I was surprised. And it was because it was it was the teacher. It was just definitely the teacher. And then I had to take it for summer school and I got an A plus. And so it's like, well, is it the student or is it the way that it was presented to them? And it was definitely the way that it was presented because the second teacher I had at summer school, he was a total nerd. He was like super excited. Like he came in and he was excited about science. I'm like, dude, this guy's excited about science. I want to be excited about science.
It's
Like, why is he
contagious.
excited? Right? The other guy was just like, this is a mitochondria and okay, just read amongst yourselves. And he didn't teach. There was no excitement in what
Ugh.
he did. And so every time I've taught after that, I've always tried to model myself after that biology teacher because
Mm,
it's like I think the kids are more receptive if you're excited about something than like, you know.
totally. I think that's true of all human beings, you know. I think that's why when I do my podcast, I just tell my guests, please share about whatever you're excited to talk about. It doesn't have to be something I even know about personally or care about personally because I get excited just hearing another person be genuinely invested in what they're talking about. And it gives me a window into their world internally, who they are, and how that informs the way they interact with the external world. And to me, that's extremely valuable because we live in this very disconnected world these days. And I refuse to accept that. So thank you again for having this conversation with me. I feel like you're a person who wants to get to know what's beneath the surface with people and just kind of like talk about existential human questions in a way that is not patronizing, not loaded. And I think that's very rare and very cool. So
I
I
just think that
appreciate,
people are so cool, right? And like
yeah,
I'll never have the experiences that you have. So the only way that I can know about that and understand the world better is to ask people about, just to ask people about stuff because how am I ever going to learn? How am I going to ever have a formulated opinion on something if I don't ask people about stuff? Um, and that's why I had so many, like immediately when we became friends, I'm like, I totally want to have her on because I have so much. And I told Desmond, and I told him to last minute because I know he would have had a million questions as well. Because it's such a fascinating topic. And there's so much that people can learn from it, and it's so interconnected with so many different things. Like even the cats, when we're talking about cats, and look at how many cultures they buried the cats,
yes,
right? Like let's, and it's not just the Egyptians. There's tons of cultures. So what what do they know? What did they know that maybe we stopped looking at because we've got, I mean, even in the last 20, 30 years, like the world has changed so much because people now have the internet, right? So their focus is on whatever. As a librarian, I see a decline of kids at 30 years ago reading versus kids today. It's much different because 30 years ago you didn't have 500 channels on TV. You didn't
right.
have like, the internet. You didn't you so you either listen to music or you read books. Like usually that's what, or you played outside. Those were
Yeah.
like the three things. Like video
Hmm.
games. Okay, we'll say four things. So we had video games, playing outside, sports activity. You read or you listened to music, and some people did all those things. But now you've got, which is great. There's so much stuff to do, but you know, it forces people not to kind of focus on
Exactly.
certain things.
There's no focus because there's an overload, right? Like I might be among the last generation of people who remembers what it was like to just go play outside, or like when I developed an interest in film and music from a young age, but I had to go to physical stores and like try to find this rare album or this out of
Yeah,
print book or whatever. It wasn't easy to just go on the internet and find it, but you know what? Like, at the risk of sounding ancient, like it was part of the journey, part of the enjoyment of the experience to go through that ordeal to find it, and to find that physical media and hold it in your hands is a completely different valuable experience than to download something or just like hit a button and order it on eBay. Like, yes,
yeah.
instant gratification is nice. It's a dopamine hit of its own, but it's not the same. And I don't think there's any way to approximate that for other generations. So, like, I suppose it's not so much about trying to turn things back in time. It's about, like,
Yeah.
what do we do now to
Yeah.
make a more enriching, multi-sensory experience happen again? Because,
Yeah.
you can't turn the clock back, and I don't think you should want to necessarily. One thing I do think is cool is when I was growing up, probably like with you, it was very much like how you dressed equated to what music you listened to is very specific. And if you deviated, people would have stupid things to say and whatever. And
Yeah.
nowadays, it's just kind of like very open. Kids can listen to whatever they want, read whatever books they
Yeah.
want. The idea of genre and scene is not so narrow, which I think
Yeah.
is really cool.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's so open and so multifaceted. How do you focus? How do you narrow?
Yeah.
I don't know that we have answers to that either, but we can try. I think,
I think it's kind of nice though. I mean, I think it can sometimes change into other things when you're talking about things being mutable and stuff. And in the earlier podcasts, I, talked to friends. I'm like, kids don't have that joy of searching for like an import, a single import,
yes,
because it would have some B-side on it that you couldn't get anywhere else. And it
right.
was like hunting for that, and how exhilarating and exciting, because you would also discover other music. And then, I mean, I remember looking for one thing and then pulling up one day William Burroughs and Kurt Cobain. And I was just like, what is this? And it was like they recorded a priest, they called him. William Burroughs, said it out loud, and then Kurt just did the music behind it. I would not have found it if I didn't go look at something else. And then I, looked it up recently. It was like really super rare. And I didn't realize how rare it was. And it was just like from looking. And so I said to somebody, I'm like, kids don't get to do that today. But yesterday I took my son prom shopping because he's going to prom tonight as a freshman. And
Oh,
I'm like, I didn't
can't
even get
wait.
asked as a senior. And I'm like, you're going as a freshman? He's
I
like, yeah, it's
never
just
went
us
to
guys.
prom, and you can tell by looking at me.
See, I didn't go to prom either. And it's funny because I still have all the same friends like from high school. I'm like, you guys, none of you could have like had a pity thing for me. And
I would
the
have
general
taken you on a
consensus,
non-pity date.
if
Let's
I go
say
to
like, oh
Chicago, we'll have a prom date together, you and
my
I.
God,
We'll
yes.
go and do
We'll
that. It
go
would be
to the
so fun. We'll
Museum
go
of
to
Physical
Zuzu's,
Science and
and then
Zuzu.
we'll go to Zuzu's afterwards.
Yes. And I'll talk about tea, and you'll be like, oh my God, when will she shut up?
I love I love that that they built that space. Like I so much I think it's more Chloe than Billy, but I think that
It's her
a
baby.
lovely um it's such a great space, it's such a great space, and I love to see how it's evolved because
Yes.
it's turned into a community.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big person for the word community. I love community as much of an introvert as I am, as much of an antisocial person as I am. I do love community.
I
And
relate.
the one surprising thing about this podcast is it ended up turning into a kind of a community, and it wasn't what I thought. Like I just was like, I'm just going to record and talk to my friends about music and talk about that journey. But then when Desmond and I were looking at analytics, we were just like, it's really interesting because I might have somebody that's a recording artist and I might interview them, or I might have my next door neighbor and friend from when I was 12. And both podcast episodes do well across different platforms. And I was like, well, that's interesting. And sometimes we're not talking about music. And then we started looking at age demographics. And what I found really interesting was that, and maybe it's because I talk about my son, sometimes he says something and he gets involved. But we were looking and all the age groups from 13 to 17 and then all the way down, they were all averaged the same. It wasn't like there
Wow.
was this big, and
Wow.
so I was like, wow, for like, why
That's
don't we
kind
have
of rare, yeah.
sponsors? Yeah, I was like, why don't we have sponsors? Because we could advertise to anybody. We don't monetize. We feel, I think that we're
I feel you.
purist and we're like, we don't want to monetize.
I'm
But
for
we
the
were
love
saying,
of it too.
if we could do it, we're like, that's kind of amazing that it's across the board. And I'm like,
Absolutely.
and so I sat there and I'm like, and we looked at what like the age groups for different things. And it was like the one where I had my friend that was my childhood friend from since I was 12, that did the highest rated with kids 13 to 17. And we were like scratching our heads going, I wonder why that is. So I started asking my son's friends that listened to it. I'm like, why did you guys like that one? They're like, it was just cool listening to a mom and dad, old timers talk about music. And I'm like, there it is, the old timers.
I think if I had to speculate, it might be because when you're young, you want to get a sense of what it would be like to talk to your friends in the future. You know what I mean? And that kind of
Yeah.
approximated that of like, what if I stayed friends with the same person and we talked like 20 years later?
Yeah.
So they could relate to that on some level and thought, wow, that's really cool. Because it
Yeah.
always ultimately goes back to how people personalize things, right?
Yeah.
And that's my speculation, but I don't know because I'm
Yeah.
not them. I'm in a strange, millennial generation of like my first week of high school, 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
Kind of informs a
Wow.
lot about a person's worldview.
Yeah.
But also, I acknowledge that I'm different from a lot of people my age because my parents were a little older. Like, my parents were boomers born in the early 1950s. And a lot of my Gen X friends, their parents were the same age. And I think our experiences were really similar. So, like, it's interesting to look at all these different variables. Astrology is just a framework for that. Like, I talk about generations based on, like, Pluto changes signs every close to 10 to 15 years, say. So it's the generational planet. It's a marker for like those things a lot of the time. And um, yeah, it's a shorthand for that stuff. So we could go on and on, but thank you, Lisa, for your insightful questions and just perspective. It's a pleasure to chat, and I wish we weren't so many time zones and miles apart. But
Yeah. I would love to have you back on. I feel like I'm gonna have you on a lot, and I just would love to just talk to you. And I'll do your podcast anytime. It'd be so much fun.
yes, please come on my podcast. I
I
would love
love
to
your
hear.
podcast though. It's been
Thank you.
so eye-opening. It wasn't what I expected, and it made me I love something that makes me question. And not question like, oh, she's saying no, but makes me go look back at life and go, huh, I never looked at something that way. It gives a different perspective of like, well, that makes sense. And it made me think about, I wonder about my top 10 albums that are like my favorite albums. Like,
Mm,
I wonder if there was something going on with when those were made. Did it somehow resonate with me? Those are interesting questions, and it's kind of interesting to go down those rabbit holes. And so
well,
I
thank you. I
thoroughly
appreciate that.
appreciate this. I very
Oh, yeah,
thoroughly appreciate
likewise.
this.
It's the word authenticity is thrown around a lot, ironically, in not an authentic way these days, but I feel like our conversation was just like two people hanging out talking, and
Yeah,
we just happened to be recording, and that's exactly what my podcast is about, and I think that's
exactly.
why we connect. And I
Yes.
appreciate anybody, to me, a true scientist is someone who is truly open. It's not to say that you need to agree with what I'm saying, but you're
Yeah.
giving it a real shot without a preconceived notion projected on that. And
Yeah.
I think that's so cool.
Openness gets you so far in life. I try to tell the kids this all the
Yeah.
time. I'm like, openness gets you far. You don't need
Yes.
to forgive people. You can, you don't need to forget people. That whatever, but openness gets you so far. And also not having expectations. That's the second thing. I'm like,
Yes.
don't be open, don't have expectations. And remember that a lot of times that we make ourselves miserable. And
Those
so
three
try
are
to
so valuable. Where were you when I was growing
huge.
up? Those three
Where
are
was I
really
where was I when I was growing up? Because I mean, and I was talking to my friend Alex that was my neighbor. I'm like, man, we both said, man, we wish we knew when we were young
yeah.
that we can't this was the thing that was a stickler for both of us, that people I think when I was young, I expected people to love me the way that I loved them. And that caused me so much heartache. So much heartache. I'm like, why can't you love me? Like, I love you so much. Like, why can't you love me like that? And then you realize it's like, maybe they are loving you to the best of their ability. It's
in
just
their
different from
way.
you. Yeah, it's just
Exactly.
different. And it's
Yeah.
based on how they were raised, what they were shown. Like I
Yeah.
will say somebody in my family, I've just recently, because I never thought about it, is a narcissist. And it's not to say that that's a bad thing, like, but
Shout out to my
now that
father.
now that I understand it, I'm like, I I maybe I'm more forgiving to them because I
Sure.
don't I,
He
I don't think
deserves
that
compassion.
I don't think that people choose to be
No.
sometimes that way. So it's like once I understood that, I'm like,
Mm.
not only can I be more forgiving to them, but I could be more forgiving to myself at those times where I was like, I don't
Absolutely.
want to have nothing to do with that or you or whatever. And then
Yes.
you're like, I understand why I reacted that way, but I understand why they reacted that way. And there's healing. Like I'm a
Yes.
big person for
Yes, both
healing.
sides.
Like whatever
Same.
whatever people you got something that could heal, give it to me. Let me hear. Let's try it. Like I'm
You're
totally because
braver than most then.
like healing is fantastic. Like let's be healers. I don't play a healer in gaming. Do you game?
I usually play as like a battle mage.
Yeah, I'm a World of Warcrafter. And
But
so like
yeah,
I
no,
always
I don't play social games, so I'm so
yeah,
antisocial that like I don't like online
yeah,
gaming.
yeah,
I play with my friends, maybe, but that's even a
yeah,
stretch. I usually play alone. I really like strategy and RPG games, but I'm incapable of playing like anything too far from who I am. So I think the battle mage says a lot. Like I can do healing stuff, but I like distance and I like elemental magic. And I think,
yeah,
yeah, that says a lot about me symbolically. As funny as that sounds, like when
yeah.
people are like,
No,
oh,
that's why it's always fascinating to me when I ask people like, are you a gamer? What do you play? Like I want to know because I think that it's very interesting.
what
Like
do
when
you
I
like
first
to play
started,
as, if I may
well,
ask? Like, what character
when I
class?
first started, it was like 2008. My friend Mike Coulter was like, "Do you play World of Warcraft?" I'm like, "No, I don't play." He's like, "Get this game. Go buy this game." And
Did you and
I
VJ
played
talk
it.
about this?
Yes, we
Okay,
have
good.
talked about not in depth. We want to come back and talk about in depth because we talk too much pumpkin stuff, and we're like, yeah, we want to do
Okay,
a
I'm proud
Warcraft.
that we barely talked about the pumpkins,
I
and
know
a
we
lot of
haven't that
people
much.
don't know that I actually like truly love the pumpkins.
Yeah, like a lot of people don't know with me either. But it's funny. Like I interviewed Justin Corwin yesterday,
Oh,
who
cool.
he has a deep dive channel. And he has like Ash Sharella goes on his show a lot and things like that. And she's a huge Pumpkins fan. But
Yes.
it was funny because we were just talking about gaming and things like that. I find it funny when Mike told me you should do World of Warcraft. He was like explaining to me, and he's like, you can have these different roles. There's mages, there's this, there's that.
Mhm.
I thought just because of the person that I am, I'm
Yeah.
like, I want to be a healer. I want to be maybe a warlock. I want to be a healer. I want to do spells. I want to do that. What I play today is so far from me. And I say like all the time, that is my dual character and like that's my dual personality.
Yeah.
I play a tank. I play a
Oh,
tank.
really?
And what's so
You're like
funny and
up front.
yeah, and people are like, "That's strange. Why aren't you a healer?" I'm like, "I'm a death knight tank." And the reason why I liked playing a tank was
It's dark.
I don't want to have to rely on anybody else.
Yeah,
Like,
that I can
it's just like
understand.
if I can get it done, I'm going to get it done. Being a
Hmm.
death knight, I self heal, so I don't even need to rely on you guys healers so much yourself.
Yeah.
I've got heavy, heavy armor, so like I don't have to worry about damage behind me. Like so,
Yeah.
and it's like I'm not afraid to go up and kind of confront. And at
Hmm.
times in life, and it sounds so stupid, but at times in life when I've felt weak and stuff, I'm always like, be more like punk rocker. She's a badass. Like she will go into any battle and I don't care. Like I'm never intimidated. I'm like, I'm gonna go and I'll fight that battle. And it's so not me. It seems like so not me
But
because people would
it's a
think I'm a
facet
healer.
of you. It's just maybe not the most obvious part of you that everyone sees all the time, right? Like, because for me too, like people would think I'd be a healer too. Like I do
Yeah,
such healing work in my life,
yeah,
and I'm a caring, like people like just intuitively want me to take care of their kids, their animals, like
yeah,
probably much like yourself. They
yeah,
sense that nurturing, empathetic side to me, and that's very
yeah,
much me. I'm proud to be that kind of a person. But when I'm like gaming, like I'm like, no, I'm a battle mage. I'll like set you on fire or conjure a lightning bolt to destroy you in your tracks. And like, I remember many years ago now, I was playing like Diablo 3 with like
hey,
my friends who are all dudes, and they were like, oh no, we both died, and Diana's the only one left, so now we're and I was like, well, you. Sorry, you can bleep all this if you want or edit this out entirely, but it's a funny story. I was like, well, fuck you. I'm going to fucking win. And they were like, yeah, sure. And sure enough, I defeated the boss. I was like, you're welcome. Y'all died. I didn't. Have a nice day.
yeah,
And they were like, wow, we didn't know you were actually good at this game. And I was like, did y'all think you were doing all the work all of the time just because I wasn't grandiose about, ooh, look at me? But that was very much a microcosm for my life. It kind of helped me understand, like, being a person of like quiet power, soft power is still very impactful, whether others witness it or not. And sometimes, depending upon circumstance, it's like kind of fun to surprise people or whatever. So I think the prism of gaming can be an interesting mirror for
yeah,
facets of life and people.
yeah, yeah.
So thank you for
I
that.
mean, I think it's just very, I think it's really interesting also that I think that I could be more extroverted in that, and
Mhm.
not in terms of I'm not talking to other characters or anything like that, but
Yeah.
I don't feel, I think sometimes in real life I'm like, "Oh, maybe not like shrinking myself, but sometimes you're just like, I don't know if the world can handle me as me. So it is almost kind of like censoring yourself.
Yeah.
Whereas over
Holding back
there,
a little bit.
yeah, I mean, obviously, it's not a new topic. I'm not saying anything new. There's misogyny in gaming. There just is, you know. Um, it's a heavy misogyny in gaming, right? And especially if you're a
Yes.
tank and my tune is a female tune, you are immediately they're like, and you see people leave, they're like, oh, tank's a girl. Number one, so many guys roll a character as a girl so they could slut mog her. Like,
Right.
let's just talk about like, and it's so many people are like, what's your character look like? And I'm like, it's totally not slut mogged at all. Like it's got the most ostentatious like headgear. I've got wings, I've got
I love
steel
it.
wings, I've got like, it's so like I'm ready to battle, but it makes me feel good because sometimes, yeah, it's stupid. Like if I do feel weak in life, I'm like, be more like punk rocker, get out there, be a badass.
No, there's nothing wrong with that. I think, you know, it's interesting because I recently had a discussion with some friends about AI as like a form of magic, and I think about like RPGs and creating these very highly personalized curated avatars or characters as
Yeah,
analogous to that idea of like creating a certain version of ourselves. Like for me, I always say I'm a creative person in general, but when it comes to gaming, I'm very uncreative because I always just play as me. My characters usually look and behave exactly like I would.
yeah, yeah,
But I think
yeah,
that's kind of good in a way because I'm like, there's no separation. I'm always kind of the same chaotic person.
yeah,
I guess chaotic good or neutral good on the alignment chart. That's like who I am and who my characters always are too.
yeah,
Never lawful, too boring. And I guess I'm just always between neutral and good. Evil is not alluring to me, despite
yeah,
my goth
right?
sensibilities. It's just not me. Um, and it's helped me clarify things about myself, So when people are like, oh, you're trying to escape into a fantasy, I'm like, that's not been my personal experience at all. And I think a lot of people find it healing, to use a word you brought up before, in a way to like witness oneself from a removed perspective. We can't ever know what other people observe of us, but it's a close approximation sometimes, and we learn things. Like I remember like the game Skyrim when it came out, right? I love the Elder Scrolls games.
Skyrim.
I
Love it.
remember the beginning of the game and how people would be like, "Oh, I killed a chicken in the first town I went into," and then like, they like arrested me, and that was bullshit. That was so annoying. And didn't that happen to you? And I was like, no. Why would I kill an innocent chicken? That's sociopathic. Why would I do that? And they were like, because it's a
Yeah.
game and you can. And I was like, I wouldn't do that in real life, and I wouldn't do it in the game either. Like, it just didn't compute in my brain. Like, killing an innocent chicken, that's boring.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't do that. And even with like impunity, I'm very purposeful, I guess. And that taught me something
Yeah.
about my personality. I'm not lawful necessarily, but I suppose I lack a certain degree of what I'd call cruelty.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if that makes me like a kitty petting, flower sniffing hippie, but
It makes you all good. It makes you all good.
but thank you for like bringing up these questions because I don't think that people think about it that way a lot of the time. They're just like, oh, gaming is an escape from reality and it has nothing to do with life. And if that's true for some people, cool, I guess. But for me, it's certainly a reflection on it and
I
ways
mean,
to.
I think I've learned stuff about myself from just gaming, like,
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of Skyrim, there was and you might have known, there was a kind of if there was one quest, if you took it, you got a dog with you.
Yes.
And if you didn't turn in that dog just follows you everywhere. And then you could get another dog. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can only really tame one dog, but if you got
Yes.
this one quest, you could have. So I had two dogs everywhere that I went, and then I remember somebody killed the dog, one of the dogs, and I went like John Wick. I was like, I'm gonna, and I couldn't save him. So my son was like, why don't you just go to an earlier save? And then just avoid that. I'm like, oh
Right.
yeah, that's what I have to do. And I didn't care
Go
about
back in
losing all the
time.
progress because I was like, I gotta go back. I gotta get the dog
That
back.
happened to me the first time my horse died. It was like, get another
Right?
horse. And I was like, no, it's like, you can't even name the horse. I'm like, I don't care. That's my horse.
It's
Like,
my horse. Oh God, I
I'm
love
gonna go back
Skyrim.
to my old save. That was even the horses before the dog. So I feel you. I was like, no, I'm going back to an earlier save before my horse got killed because I wanted to keep my horse the entire game.
Exactly. Like I feel very like even I play this game called Horizon Zero, and um you get a mechanical animal, and even when the mechanical animal dies, I'm like,
That's not
I
a
gotta
Marilyn
go back.
Manson reference.
Yeah, it's just like I gotta go back and I gotta get that. I gotta get that mechanical mount back. Even it's not
Oh,
even like real. Like I just want to get. I
yes.
have a question, and this is not related to gaming or anything like that, but I want to ask you because I promised my mother I would ask this question. Um, because if I could sit there and say, "Hey, it's not me. It was in the stars, and it's in the stars, and I was made this way, and I can't change." My mother has a big issue with me constantly calling out injustice in the sense that, like little injustices to the point where she thinks I'm going to get stabbed or
Like
shot
you're
someday.
harping on little things that would upset people more than anything else, type of thing.
Well, in this country, handicap parking is an honor system.
Oh.
It's an honor system, and it's really not enforced anywhere,
Mm. So
right?
you have to
So
basically just kind of handle yourself. If someone takes that spot, you have to be like, hey, there's a handicapped
like
person.
a lot of times I have my mom, like my
That
mom's
sounds
older, she can walk, but she's got a
fair.
wheelchair sometimes. Like if we're going to go someplace walking a long distance. And so I see people all the time that are just parking their supercars, their Lamborghinis, their BMWs, and they get out of the car in front of me and they just walk. And I'm like, hey,
Hmm.
hi, you forgot your wheelchair. Do you need help getting your wheelchair? And they look at me and give me a dirty look.
Like,
And she's
what?
always upset. She's like, why do you always have to do this? And I'm like, because it's so rude, mom. I'm like, it's just rude. It's just like
It's
common
entitled
courtesy.
bullshit. Yeah.
right? And she's like, one of these days you're going to get stabbed. She's like, somebody's, because I constantly do it. Like, I can't, or if I see
Mm.
somebody littering, I'm like, hey, you dropped something, like, or I'll chase them. I'm like, hey, you dropped this. Like, and she says, why do you do that? And so, like, I told her, I'm like, I don't know. Like,
Well,
inside of me, like, I don't want to accept it. So I thought, I was thinking, I'm like, maybe it's a star thing.
sure. Well, I can give you my thoughts on this, right? So I think the archetype of Mars has to do with self assertion and kind of being brave enough to call things out. Mars rules your second house of values, and it also rules your ninth house of expansion and higher thought. So inherently, I think on some unconscious level for someone with the Pisces ascendant, um, being direct and showing some aggression in standing up for what you believe in has a direct tie to what you feel is right in your value system and what will help you grow as a person to be moral and sort of sound in your life philosophy. And then for further detail, I would look at the placement of Mars in your chart. And I'm like, okay, you have Mars in the sixth house, which has to do with habits and routines. And a sixth house Mars person just kind of wants everybody to put their money where their mouth is, essentially. Like, do not be pretentious or say one thing and do another, right? That there's this
Yeah.
problem there with that. You have a trine, a harmonious aspect between Chiron, the wounded healer, in your second house of values, and Mars in the sixth house. So I think on some level, like if we're going to talk about the idea of like karma or healing some pattern, um, I think standing up for what you feel is right in terms of spiritual hygiene in everyday life and habits, that's connected to those values, and that the freedom that we all have as individuals to act on our own accord should be in uh, alignment with what we feel is going to kind of create a better world for everyone. It's quite
Yeah.
idealistic, but it's in the
I
chart
know.
for sure.
Yeah, I'm a big stickler of integrity.
Yeah,
I
it's
like
kind of
integrity.
hard, right? Hard to be that person, and I personally empathize with that too, where I'm like, yeah,
It's like
okay.
people can do stuff to me, I don't care. But like when I see somebody doing something, like it I would say that I would agree that I'm a lot like you in this sense. And I think both of us, it's fair to say, which a lot of people probably wouldn't look at either of us, but I believe 100% in this statement that we are probably the first people that would offer the shirt off our back for somebody that needed it. And that's not just trying to be like, oh, we're great people. I just think that that's just something that's in our nature that we can't help. I don't
No,
think it's like
sometimes I've felt it's not a advantageous thing, to be
yeah,
honest.
no, it's not at all, right? And so, but I think that we're that type of people. And I'm generally like always in a good mood. I don't really think about negative things. I don't get stressed. I've learned a long time ago that stress does you no good medically. I could go down a whole rabbit
Well,
hole
that is
about how
true.
terrible stress is on the human body. So it's like I try
Mhm.
not to be stressful. However, when I get mad, and I think it takes a lot for me to get mad,
Yeah,
I'm mad.
same.
I'm like super mad because I'm doubly mad because I'm like, you know what? Because in my head, I'm thinking, it takes a lot for me to get
Yes.
mad. Now that I'm mad, I'm double mad because you've gotten me to this point. So like
Right.
I'm just doubly pissed now
Oh,
because like
I am exactly
you've
the same.
brought this out of me. Like, and so when I see people like I've seen people say rude things to workers, like just being rude to workers at restaurants, and I'm just like, hey, my mom's like, it's none of your business. And a lot of times, yeah, it's none of my business, but like, I don't like that. Like, I just think, like, especially if the person doesn't fight back. And I'm like, oh,
Sure, because they're intimidated. They're on the job. They don't want to get in trouble. I hate that because to me,
yeah,
the aggressor knows that, and they are taking advantage of the fact that they think, oh, that person is not going to fight back.
yeah. that's why she
I'm
thinks
the
I'm gonna get
same way. Like,
stabbed.
I've even joked about it. I'm like, I live in Chicago and I like stand up to crazy people on the train and no one's ever stabbed me. That's a
Yeah.
miracle in and of
Yeah.
itself because I will literally say, shut the up. No one wants to hear a racist rant. Because you do unfortunately sometimes hear people saying really messed up stuff. Like, in to give it more context, in that particular instance, there was this old white woman. This was years ago when Obama was in office, right? And she was like reading the newspaper. It was like maybe 9 in the morning at most, and she was like in a crowded train. She and I were probably the only white people on the entire train car, and she was like, "Yeah, blah 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 is wrong with this country, and you know." That's the problem with putting one of those people in office. And then she continued and it got worse from there. And I just finally I looked around me and I saw other people's faces and I was like, I have to say something before
Yeah.
this gets worse, right? And I was offended just at the hostility of like, look, it's America. Think what you want,
Yeah.
but keep it to yourself, right? You're in a
Yeah.
public space. So I said, look, no one wants to hear this racist. And she was like stunned that I said that. But I looked to my right and there's a young woman, not white, who was like, her friends were holding her back from physical confrontation, right? And I was like,
Yeah.
don't allow this person. She's just going to call the police. It's a provocateur.
Yeah.
She wants to ruin your life because she's not
Yeah.
happy. And so it's very strange to like observe all that stuff. And to be honest with you, I didn't used to really think about like the concept of guardian angels too much, but because I'm pathologically that person like yourself that just like, this is wrong and I'm not
Yeah.
going to stand here and allow this to continue. I do not know why. I have never once experienced anything as a repercussion beyond like maybe a couple insulting words. But
I think probably you was mentioning that you're like 5'10".
yeah, but I'm also like pretty skinny. Do I look
Well, I'm
scary
like,
and imposing? Like, ooh, I'm gonna beat you up.
no, but when I wear shoes, I'm like 5'9", so not big, but eye makeup and stuff does save us. I
Yeah,
honestly
that's
think
true.
that
I
it
don't
it does.
smile.
The height and the eye makeup, I think what it is they don't know what to expect from somebody like us.
Yeah.
Right? If you have somebody that looks like, I don't know, like Ronda Rousey, like a fighter, then they're like they know what to expect from her. Or if you have somebody that I don't know, like looks like Gwyneth Paltrow, okay, they're like, okay, she's tall, but she's blonde, she looks nice, like she doesn't want to break her nails. Like, and Gwyneth Paltrow could be a scrapper for all I know, but I'm just saying what other people, are looking at it as, but it's like
Yeah.
for
The
somebody
superficial
like
aspect.
me and somebody like you where somebody might look at us and say, oh, they look like really nice, kind of sweet, kind of passive people, but there's a side of me that if I see something that's not cool, if you're being uncool to an animal or another human being for no reason, like I've got an issue with you.
Same. And that's kind of the power though of coming across like as this kind of like passive, innocuous person. They don't see it coming and it's like, well, maybe if your behavior was above board, no one would have to check it. That's always where I think of it because I don't live my life trying to correct other people or confront other people. That's not really something that I enjoy. I
Yeah.
actually don't enjoy, right?
Yeah.
I think you're the same way. It's not something
Yeah.
I
We don't want to
have
do
a
it.
good time
We
doing,
would
but
like
like,
everybody to be cool, you know?
right? If everyone talked to me the way you did, I'd be like having the best time ever. But thank you so much for, having this very non structured, non pretentious conversation. I think that's your sort of advantage as a podcast host is just trying to really go beneath like the surface level. So
Yeah,
appreciate
I've thoroughly I'm so happy that, um, Billy suggested this, like, he was so spot on this one, like, I don't think he's ever suggested in 20 years, like, "You should be friends with this person," but I'm so glad because it's just, like, I love it, I know that we'll have tons and tons of conversations over the years, and they'll all be, like, excellent.